Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. I'll open the meeting at 7:30. And we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We may have roll call, please.
Mr. Carpenter.
Here.
Mr. Fitzer. Mr. Colbert. Mr. Kucera.
Here.
Mr. Nushai.
Here.
Ms. Redmond.
Here.
Mr. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Solomon.
Here.
And Mr. Tinlin.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is approval of the agenda. Is there anybody with change anything in the agendas and standing in front of us? Seeing nothing, I will then approve that agenda as it stands. And agenda item number 5 is approval of the regular meeting minutes from November 28th, 2023, our last meeting.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from November 28th, 2023.
Second.
Motion support. Anybody want to change anything? Anybody happy with it? Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
Mr. Nushai.
Yeah.
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Mr. Scott. Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin.
Yes.
And Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion, items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here from the public wishing to opine on anything? We'll give you a chance if you're interested, but seeing none, I will then close public discussion. Agenda item number 7 is preliminary planned unit development qualification for a multifamily development at 150 North Main Street. And I believe our city planner will start us out here, right?
Yes, I'll get us going. Thank you. So you received a review letter in the plans for this. As it says, it's conceptual at this point. So before we get too into this, what I want to do, because I know that not everybody's been on the planning commission when we've done a planned unit development. In fact, we only have one planned unit development in the entire city. It's a little further up Main at 516 North Main, pretty much right over there. It's at Roth in Maine, under construction. So not a ton of these have ever come through the city. But basically, a planned unit development, the ability for us to have a planned unit development section in our ordinance comes from the Zoning Enabling Act. And back in 2006, it was amended to include a planned unit development. And what that is a development tool that allows some of the ordinance standards that would typically apply to a development based on where it is and what kind of development it is, to be modified by the Planning Commission and usually also the legislative body. In the case of Clausen, that applies. The City Council will be also looking at this in exchange for benefits or a character of development that would not otherwise be possible in that location. So it's a little bit of a give and take, if you will. They're asking for some things typically that normally they would be held to other standards, and then they're offering something in exchange for that. So you're kind of
remove the zoning board of appeals from the process.
It does actually, yes.
So they have nothing to do with it.
Right. So they wouldn't be able to grant variances within a PUD. So a planned unit development going forward into the future is governed by a planned unit development agreement. And that's an agreement that is made between council and the applicant, because council has the ability to enter into a contract, which is essentially what a planned unit development agreement is. And any time that the site is modified in the future, the agreement would then be modified accordingly along with that And that kind of governs the site in perpetuity going forward.
Eventually take the planning commission out of the thing? Would it?
No, typically what it would,
What council has complete say, right?
right, ultimately, council does have the final say, but planning commission is always involved holding that public hearing and making recommendations to council. So ultimately, if this gets to final planning and development, we'll be making a recommendation to council, and then council will be making a final decision. At this stage, though, we have what's called qualification. So we're not at a public hearing yet. What they've done is they've submitted a conceptual plan, and we've looked at it and identified where it deviates from the ordinance and kind of laid that out for you in the letter. And then they've also kind of made their case for why they want those deviations and what they are providing in return for them. And our job tonight is to assess what they've put in front of us, assess how comfortable we are with it, what we think of it, and give them honest feedback about what we think of this plan. So if there are concerns, we need to tell them what those concerns are. If we love it, we need to tell them we love it. If there's anything that we want in terms of modifications or something that we think could improve the plan, that's communication that needs to occur tonight with the applicant so that they're aware and they can make adjustments to the plan. Now, just like with anything, you don't necessarily have to have a final motion on qualification tonight. You can ask them to make modifications in return. That's true of any plan that we ever look at. So it's true here as well. If you do grant conceptual PUD qualification, that's not a guarantee that final PUD approval will be granted as well. But it does give them the ability to move on to that final approval phase where we have our public hearing and then make our recommendation to council. So going now to the site, we're looking at 150 North Main. This used to be PNC Bank. So it's a 2-story building with a big, like 1-story peninsula that sticks out to the south. There's some drive-through lanes there. Parking lot, kind of a long main south of the building, and then some more parking on the east side of the building. And then those drive-through lanes coming down off Lincoln Avenue toward Bowers, and then they exit onto Bowers. It's 1.15 acres. So for downtown, this is actually a pretty large site that we're looking at here. Part of that is because it's actually 2 sites. One of the things that you'll notice on the first page of this letter is that there is a residential lot that's included in the overall site for this plan. So that's why there's also split zoning listed at the top of the letter where it says that it's city center and R2. That single family lot is currently zoned R2. The PUD can lay over multiple zoning districts so long as the site is under single control. So looking at the surrounding sites, as we always do, to the north, we have CMD and R2 zoning, and there's some commercial development along Main and then single family homes once you get down Lincoln. To the west, you have a mix of CMD and CC zoning across Main Street. To the south, it's all zone city center and there's commercial development there. And then to the east, we have a mix of R2 along Lincoln Avenue and core residential zoning along Bowers. And those are all single family homes to the east. I've already kind of gone through the PUD process, but it is here in the letter for you to refer to whenever you need to. Permitted uses in a PUD is kind of the first thing that we look at. So our plan unit development ordinance, which is section 3.1 S in our zoning ordinance. Permits business, service, office, and commercial uses. And it also permits them in tandem with residential uses. So it's fairly wide open in terms of the uses, and basically, we have to look at where it's being proposed and is that the right place for what's being proposed in terms of the mix. In this case, they're really just proposing a multifamily use. There's no other use involved here. So proposing a multifamily development with a 3-story building. There's 66 total units. There's 69 on-site parking spaces, and they're also creating 8 on-street parking spaces along Main Street going north. They have 10 bicycle parking spaces in the interior of their site. There's a dumpster enclosure, a screen fence, actually, not it says wall in the letter, but it's a fence along the eastern property line. They're all part of this proposal. The building does include a common lobby area, and that is right at the corner of Bowers and Main in the plans that have been submitted. So section 3.1S1D of the zoning ordinance sets forth a set of criteria for planned unit development qualification. So to be eligible for planned unit development approval, the applicant has to demonstrate, and the Planning Commission and City Council have to find that the proposed development meets these 4 criteria. Criteria are there in the letter. There's a recognizable and substantial benefit. So the planned unit development shall achieve a higher quality of development than would otherwise be achieved under conventional standards, shall result in a recognizable and substantial benefit to the community and to the ultimate users of the developed site. So our comment on that is the applicant is seeking some deviations from the standards of the current zoning districts in order to effectuate this development. We have comparisons later in the letter. Plan appears to propose pretty high quality design and materials. The substantial benefit to the community should be a principal topic of discussion at the Planning Commission meeting. So they provided a letter outlining what they believe to be the public benefits of the project in 8 bullet points. So we're going to want to go through that with them and assess whether or not we feel like that's a good trade for the waivers that they're requesting. Item 2, criterion 2, availability and capacity of public services. So the proposed type and density of use shall not exceed the capacity of existing public services, facilities, and utilities. Public utilities in the area do appear to be able to serve the proposed development. We've had discussions of this internally. We've had a couple of pre-application meetings where we've had the engineer present a couple times. So in terms of our utilities, there's no real concerns here as to whether or not it can handle what's being proposed. Development exits onto Bowers and Lincoln. So traffic generated onto side streets is mostly going to go toward Main, but some of it will likely go down Lincoln and Bowers. And it's a matter of assessing whether or not that's likely to exceed other things that could be developed by right in the city center district. And given the things that could be put on this site by right, it's probably about a wash in terms of what they're asking for versus what could be built. Consistency with the master plan and zoning ordinance. So the proposed development shall be consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's master plan, purpose of this zoning article, and the intent of these planned unit development regulations. So the site's labeled downtown core on the future land use map with, of course, that little corner that's residential being labeled residential. For the master plan, that designation corresponds to the city center district. That's the current zoning of most of the site. The master plan generally calls for buildings built to the sidewalk with no side setbacks and parking provided in the rear with a minimal disruption of sidewalks by driveways. Buildings should frame the street. Up to 3 stories when the 3rd story is set back. Consideration of accessory building elements such as awnings and lighting as part of the overall design of the building. Landscaping where possible, including planters or pots if other landscape areas are not available or to complement such areas. screening of parking with buildings, low walls or landscaping, and then on-street parking where possible. So those are all things that the master plan calls for. And we can compare those, of course, to the layout that's been proposed by the applicant. Economic and neighborhood impact is the final criterion. The proposed development shall not impede the continued use or development of surrounding lots for uses permitted by this zoning article or planned in the adopted city master plan. So that, of course, needs to be considered in light of all the surrounding development and this development's likely effect on the same. The application materials don't specifically address those 4 criteria. They did provide that list of public benefits, as I said, for you to assess. Planning Commission has to make a determination that each of the 4 criteria is met in order to grant qualification. So it's not like one of the 4, it's all 4. Qualification, of course, doesn't constitute final PUD approval or site plan approval, nor does it require that either will be granted at the final PUD stage. It does, however, permit the plan to move forward to a public hearing and final PUD approval, and provides the PC with the opportunity to provide feedback and guidance to the applicant. Digging into the plan and keep in mind, this is conceptual review at this point. So we don't necessarily have like a photometric plan showing what all the light levels are at the property line. We don't necessarily have a species list for the plants, all those kind of details that we'll get more heavily into at the actual phase of site plan approval. But we do have a lot of information, and what we do have gives us the ability to see where we're not quite aligned with the typical ordinance requirements. So we've pointed all that out in here. You really kind of, if you're scanning the letter, you're going to want to look for the bold green type. So to reiterate, we have 66 units being proposed here. There are 28 efficiency units, 27 one-bedroom units, and 11 two-bedroom units. The city center district doesn't have hard limits on unit or room count or unit mix, generally relies on other constraints of the site to guide those numbers. So how much parking do you need? How much of, of the site can you cover? That kind of thing. Looking at the dimensional requirements of the district, we see that we're generally meeting those. So we can be up to 42 feet tall with 3 stories, as long as the top floor is set back 10 feet from the property line. They're at 3 stories and 36 feet. They're not quite at the property line on the front and sides. They've left a little bit of like a landscaping liner there. So they're about 2 feet off, 3 feet off of those property lines. And then their rear setback, which would be to the residential to the east, is required to be 30 feet. They're at about 50 feet at the closest approach. Also looked at the minimum unit sizes that we require for efficiency 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, and they are exceeding all of those. So there's no relief requested there. Looking at the CC district standards, which is what dominates the rest of the letter. Building elements, we require that buildings have clearly defined floors and internal spaces, and that rooftop equipment is screened. So based on what's been presented to us, we feel that that standard is met. They have defined the internal spaces of the building with the architectural treatment of the building. When we look at off-street parking, this is where we start to get into some relief that's being requested. So residential in the CC district is required to meet the parking standards of section 5.1, which is where all of our parking requirements are. So for residential uses, we have a breakdown that we have 1 is required for an efficiency unit, 1.5 are required for a 1-bedroom unit, and 2 are required for a 2-bedroom unit, which gives us a total of 90 required spaces. They're at 69 on the plan. That includes 2 barrier-free spaces. So what they're requesting is to do 69 on the site. They're also going to provide 8 public parking spaces along North Main. Those, of course, can't be counted as spaces for the units because you can't park on the street overnight. But those are spaces for the public. Also along Bowers, they've not labeled the number of spaces, but it looks like 5 or 6 spaces are going to be gained along Bowers as well. Because on the north side of Bowers, you can park on the curb, not on the south side, but on the north side. And right now, this site has driveway. There's nowhere you can park. So they will be gaining some spaces along Bowers as well for the public use. Again, those can't be applied to a unit because they're on the street. But there will be a few extra spaces for the
ones out
public.
front, though, are those current spaces or are we losing street then?
A lane would be closed to provide those spaces, kind of like we've been talking about with the master plan. You remember, if you recall, a couple months ago, I gave a presentation where we talked about using that outer lane up to about the library and city hall for parking in the future.
Mhm.
That's essentially what they're doing here. They
So
are,
they're looking to constrict the road there, so
Right,
it's only gonna be
exactly.
one lane there?
so it doesn't widen up to 2 lanes as soon as it does now. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not another thing that they're seeking. They're saying that's a benefit, right?
Yes, they are presenting that as a public
Okay.
benefit. Yep.
The parking on the city property that qualifies for a parking spot for them.
No.
It's not-
it doesn't.
Their
No,
lot.
and it doesn't qualify as a parking spot for one of the units, no. Because for residential uses, you have to have a parking space that's dedicated because you can't park on the street overnight.
So the number's quite off then, isn't it? If they're 90 are required and they're providing 69.
So you're short 19, right? 21.
Short 21, yeah, short 21, yeah, exactly. So that's something you can discuss with them. And that, is related to the number of units and the number of bedrooms and things that we're looking at. So that's obviously something you discuss with them tonight. One thing I did note is that for the parking spaces on North Main, the curb should be bulbed to provide protection for those spaces. So that's just a design element that we have throughout the downtown that would need to be mirrored there. And like I said, it does look like you get 5 or 6 additional public parking spaces along the north side of Bowers as well by closing all those driveways.
And on Main Street there, where does it, I'm trying to imagine in my head, where does it open up? Because there is
It opens up
parking
at this site right
at
now.
this site, so it
Yeah.
would just be a continued,
You would continue the fabric that's a block to the south. Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
And who would pay for that cost, Joe? Would it be the development?
They would be doing that. They would be installing all that curbing and sidewalk. For bicycle parking, we do require secure, visible, accessible bike parking. They are providing 10 spaces on the site. If you're looking at the site, the building is an L shape. It's in the crook of the L. They're not proposing commercial uses on the site, so loading areas wouldn't be required. For transparency, they're not proposing any storefronts, but when you look between 2 and 8 feet above grade, they actually are meeting the 70% window coverage standard. So they've hit the standard, even though they're not providing retail at the ground floor, which is the next item in the letter, because not providing retail at the ground floor is actually one of the pieces of relief that they're requesting. So typically in the CC district, a commercial liner use is required along the principal street frontage. In this case, it'd be Main Street. And they're asking not to do that. What they want to do instead is have some of those ground level units be walkouts onto the sidewalk at Main Street. And then there's not a commercial use there. So what the liner use really is intended to do in the downtown is preserve a level of street level activity in the downtown, so that if you're walking, like, see, you leave a restaurant, you leave, it's about to be Grand River Brewery, it was Pomachug, and you turn left and you walk down the street toward Noble Village. The idea there is that you've got a continuous set of storefronts that you're walking past, rather than having like a sort of interstitial space where you've got to walk past something else to get to the other storefronts. In this case, we're on the edge of downtown and you don't really walk past this building to get to other parts of downtown. So I'm a little less concerned about it than I would be if this was, say, like the car dealership next to Mojave turning into something else. In that location, I would really want the storefronts there because you need that to pull people down the sidewalk. In this case, like I said, I'm less concerned about it because we're not on one of those 4 central blocks and we don't have other downtown uses to walk to past this building.
But it's essentially gonna serve as an apartment patio as well.
More or less, because the walkouts do come out there, yeah.
Right, so they'll be smoking and doing their, or taking their dog out, letting their dog out, or, coming in and out through that space.
They will be exiting and entering the building
Okay,
through that
That's
space, yeah.
there's a common entrance as well.
There's a common entrance
Yeah,
as well,
okay.
yeah, but the units that face Main Street on the ground floor do have their walkout doors.
You mentioned earlier that the first PUD we've had in town here is at Main and Ross.
That's correct, yeah.
Were they required to put retail on the ground floor?
They were not because they're not in the downtown. So that doesn't apply there. They did put an office space in the front of it on the part that faces Main Street.
They put a spot in. I didn't know if they were
Yeah,
required to do
it
that.
wasn't actually a requirement for them.
It was for, like, they were doing a mixed use.
Right.
Essentially. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so they're not in the CC district, so it wasn't required for them.
Okay.
I think in that case, they were nodding to the fact that it's that the underlying zoning was office, so they wanted to have a little bit of that use mixed in there. We look at screening. So one of the things that they're proposing here is a 6-foot vinyl fence and a little green belt along that eastern property line. We don't have a full landscape plan at this point. They are implying with their renderings that they're going to have a row of like arborvitae type evergreens along that fence. And that of course would be confirmed on a full landscaping plan if qualifications granted. Usually where they're proposing that fence, that would be a masonry wall that's required. So one of the things that we need to discuss with them is whether or not they want to change it to a wall or if they're actually asking for relief on that standard. Also, usually we require a knee wall along the street frontage where there's no building. So the bits of the parking lot that come down to the streets, we usually have a knee wall there or a hedge or something. And if you want to do that instead, that screens the parking, particularly headlights. So I didn't see that on the conceptual plans either. So that's another point of discussion. Looking at landscaping a little further, they do show a sufficient number of parking lot trees on the plan. They're not showing the required number of street frontage trees. So the number of tree wells along both streets is a little short. They're almost there on Bowers, but they've only got a couple on Main and there's more than that required. So I've got the requirement in here. That's something we need to discuss with them. Can you put in all the trees? Or are you asking for a waiver on the total number that is required? Building material signage would be reviewed separately, but building materials, lighting, we don't have a ton of information on lighting at this point. But we would expect that if they're not asking for any relief at this point, they're most likely going to be meeting the lighting requirements or attempting to, and we'll be reviewing that in detail at site plan.
Joe, can I ask a question real quick? This preliminary step, if I'm recalling right, is not to grant full relief on everything or not grant full relief. It's
That's right.
just to say, we're interested in your use. We think you're a benefit. Yes, no.
Right,
Right?
exactly.
So tonight, we're not deciding on relief, but we can give them ideas on things that
Exactly.
we're feeling about the
We
relief.
discuss it so that you guys can say, all right, we're comfortable with the amount of relief you're asking for. We're not comfortable with it.
Oh,
and
so
then
you
they
want us to
can-
give it a gauge on that, because,
Right.
okay, But we don't have to vote in particular on every.
You're not
relief,
voting specifically on the relief at this time.
Just
No,
the four
just the four
qualifications.
qualification
Okay.
criteria.
Thank you.
And then at final PUD, you will vote on the specific relief. But it's very important to discuss the relief
Yeah,
tonight
okay.
and give them the feedback that they need. Couple other things, let's see, so they've got the pedestrian circulation, vehicular access, as I said, was single driveway onto each side street. We looked at some of the sustainability aspects of the site that we typically do. They're of course reusing an entirely paved site, which doesn't really meet the modern stormwater management standards at the moment. So they would be required to bring that site into compliance with current stormwater management standards that are set by the county. So that could potentially improve some situations around there. Site's already served by public facilities and services. There's actually a bus stop in front of it. They are providing some bicycle parking. They have a note about EV parking in the application as may provide. That includes both on the private lot and on the street. That will have to be firmed up as we talk, but that's something you could discuss with them tonight. Particularly in terms of any EV parking that might be provided in a space where a member of the public could park along Main or Bowers. At a minimum, and I always recommend this to anybody doing multifamily, we do recommend laying conduit for charging infrastructure as the site's developed to make it easy to add chargers in the future without tearing up the site. If you have the conduit down there, all you have to do is drill down to the conduit, pull the wire, and install your charger. If you don't have the conduit, as the vast majority of multifamily projects in the world don't, you're then stuck actually digging up the parking lot or boring under it to get your conduit in. So we just think that you want to prep the site for it because it's going to come eventually. The demand is going to be there. So to summarize the relief from ordinance standards, we've got the no commercial liner use, the walkout residential units. The 69 private parking spaces in lieu of the required 90. And then these other areas that we've pointed out that we're not exactly sure if it's truly relief they're asking for, or if they just need to modify their plan. I know they have a presentation tonight, so I think maybe let's get their presentation going and then we can get back into discussion and unless there's any burning questions right now.
I had a question, Joe.
Sure.
So was there actually some kind of an impact analysis done around the water and sewer capacity for this?
I don't know exactly what kind of analysis our engineer has done. But I know that he wasn't concerned during our discussions about the ability of this area to handle the volumes that would come out of this project. But I can ask him what.
Not concerned as it operates currently that we're going to add 60 units there. He's not
concerned about adding the current units, adding the proposed units. No.
with the bringing of compliance to current standards or as it is.
Yeah, well, yeah, it has to be compliant with current stormwater standards.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of, inflows and outflows from the building and the water system and the sanitary sewer, he wasn't concerned.
I understand this is a preliminary hearing that we're having here. Question was, I've asked this before, have the residents abutting this property, have they been notified of this?
No, there's not a public hearing yet. They will be notified unless the applicants reached out to them. But they will be notified if it moves to final PUD.
In the past, there's a certain distance that within that range, they have to be told.
Right, for the public hearing, there has to be a 300-foot radius served with notice, yeah.
But that's after it's already approved as a use.
No, that's after qualification. So that's after you've told them that they can apply for final PUD.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't like it getting somebody sneaking in with neighbors not knowing what's going on. And I
Right.
understand that legally, sometimes we don't have to notify them. I just think it's the right thing to do, just let them know what's coming. Does anybody else have any questions for?
They've purchased that house already. They've.
I don't know if they actually own it or if they've just got if they've got a contingent purchase agreement or something. I don't know.
So the ownership part doesn't need to be in standing until they've,
No, a
started
contingent
construction.
purchase agreement, as with any site plan, is adequate. Yeah.
okay.
I just had one question. I think it was section 3, line item L.
Mhm.
Talks about timetable for construction. Says timetable for construction, plan unit development, any phase shall be included as part of the review and approval process. Is that for this approval process? Because I didn't see anything.
It would be for final.
for final. Okay.
Yes, they have to have their phasing, all if there's any phasing. They may just build the whole thing at once, so there wouldn't be a phasing, but they are supposed to estimate their construction timeline for the final approval phase. Yep.
Any questions for the applicant?
We'll let them give their presentation.
Would the applicant like to?
Yeah.
Approach?
Nick's gonna control their presentation up there.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time today. A few things. We have, that house has been purchased, so both the PNC Bank and the house are now under our ownership now. So there's no issues with that. And thank you for going through everything. I think it was very insightful. I don't want to repeat everything that was just said for unit count and things like that, but we can just kind of glance through that. And I know there's a few topics that are going to have a lot more questions than others, right? So starting from the beginning, that's our current design. We have that corner of Bowers and Main as the main lobby. We have been in discussions adding potentially taking out a unit potentially or taking some of that lobby and turning it into a co-working space, both for the residents and for the public, where the residents would get first opportunity and a discounted rate to use that co-working space. And then other residents or other people in Clawson could, sign up and use that space as well. That is just something that we've been discussing internally, if that makes sense, on our end as well, just to kind of create that continuity. And as we discussed, that liner past the building is really residential, right? So no one's walking past the building to get to another retail on. So if there is a retail or a small retail portion like that, we would have it on that corner close to downtown. Again, 1.15 acres, 66 total units. The estimated investment is somewhere between $19 and $20 million currently for the entire building. 24 of these 66 units would be at a 80% area median income level. So someone making that 80% median income of the area of Oakland County would be able to afford those units. Great for either people who are retiring or for people who are just starting out in their jobs and careers.
Would you prefer to go through your full presentation or do you want questions throughout?
It doesn't matter. Whatever. If you have questions, it's probably easier just to answer them as as you have them. We have gone to city council already and received a PA 210 tax abatement, which, we had to give public notice to all the residents at that time that we were going for multifamily use at that space. So we have notified the residents once, and we will again, obviously, for if we have to go to the final approvals.
Are you the architect or I'm sorry?
Owner.
You're the owner. Okay.
Me and Sandy Cronenberg are the two owners of the project. Joint development between both of our companies to do this project. Krieger and Klatt, Jason here, is the architect on the project. And our civil engineer is here as well, if you have any questions regarding the civil. So current layout, as you guys all know, is the bank that's been closed for a few years, pretty obsolete in its use. A lot of parking for not a lot of, building, kind of an eyesore at this point. It's been vacant for a few years. Our plan obviously is to build that L shape to cover all of Main and some of Bowers to kind of create a continuing downtown. The house was purchased as well, and you know, the purpose of that really at the end of the day is to be able to build something of substance, you need your parking spaces, and that's why we went and purchased the house there to include on our site plan. I think it gave us an extra like 18 to 20 spots there. Okay. Again, we have bike storage. We are going to do EV on site. We'll do conduit like this, you know, on the whole property. Probably start with 4 or 6 spaces, and as needed, we can increase them. We have discussed with the city about adding conduit onto Main or Bowers for the city as well. Again, for us to control the EV chargers that are public is probably not something we want to do. So it would be a joint where we would put the conduit and the city would decide if they want to add the EV chargers or not on the street on public land.
So to clarify that point, so the 6 to 8, whatever you said, number would be in the private lot.
Correct.
But optional.
And then we would add conduit onto Main as we're doing it. And if the city decided to add chargers, they could add chargers. Because for us to add chargers and the city to control them doesn't really make sense, right? The city would want to control and maintain and make sure they're, you know, up to date and working and paid, right?
Okay.
Next is just,
So that's your landscape.
Yep.
Plan.
this is a preliminary, you know, landscaping plan as,
Be comfortable adding in the necessary.
yeah, I don't think that's an issue adding the trees. It really was more about design. If the city wants trees to be lined, that's fine. I mean, I don't think that's an issue on our end.
What about the privacy fence? Because typically these type of buildings have the masonry or cement or whatever it may be.
So that is part of it's a civil, and we can get to that later. Just the width needed for masonry plus the footings kind of increase that space, which makes our lot smaller. And that's a civil question you guys can get into a little bit more. And now I kind of wanted to discuss the PUD qualifications, right? There's the 4 items that we have to meet in order to qualify for a PUD to go to our final PUD approval. And one of them in the city code is being considered a brownfield by the state or federal government. And by us receiving the PA 210, we qualify as a brownfield by the state. So then we can kind of step into here and ask for a PUD because we do qualify for a brownfield. Substantial and recognizable benefit. You know, the biggest thing is we're building a building that is substantially better than what's there now. And that's both beneficial for the city, beneficial for the residents and their tax values, and beneficial for all the shops and restaurants on the street to add, you know, 66 to 80 residents who will be there shopping at the grocery store, buying clothes, eating dinner, working or whatever it may be in Clawson.
So you said you do qualify for a brownfield?
Yes, so
Okay.
technically, because the city council in Clawson approved our PA 210, we are technically approved for a brownfield by the state. We're not asking for brownfield credits or taxes, but it's under the same
You
category.
got a 10-year tax
Correct,
abatement for
that's
this
correct.
product.
And that qualifies us as a brownfield site by the state of Michigan.
Okay.
So the availability and capacity of public services. As we've discussed already, the site is not up to current code. It will be up to current code after construction. We also will have an underground detention basin to take some pressure off of the city services. So an overall net benefit for both the residents and the city of Clawson.
With DTE.
And we met with DTE. DTE is completely fine with it. There's no issue from the electrical standpoint of the capacity at that site. Consistency with the master plan and zoning. We believe the project really helps get the city to where its goals are in the current master plan. part of it was to revitalize along the main road and corridors and kind of create a lane diet to slow down traffic on 14 in Main, which will create more walkability, more ability for, people crossing the road now don't have 4 lanes to cross, it's 2 lanes to cross. It creates a continuous downtown. And that's just already built into the master plan, and part of this project would be to add those 8 parallel spots that just kind of extend from downtown up to our project. The other part of it, we believe, is it creates a diverse housing market in the city of Clawson. You have from a studio to a 2-bedroom. Again, you can get all types of people at all income levels who will want to live there, who will hopefully end up being lifelong Clawson residents, whether they start their life in a studio and buy a house in Clawson. It's bringing more visibility and I don't know what the word is, but just kind of creating a more active downtown to help those retail spaces that are currently vacant or are having trouble because you don't have enough walk-in traffic, right? So this will create hopefully another 66 to 75 people who come there, plus their families who come to visit or whatever it may be to come eat dinner downtown. And that's kind of going to the next slide, the economic and neighborhood impact. The goal here is to really create a cohesive downtown. We've kind of built the building under the height limit. We've done the setback. We want that landscape buffer so it doesn't feel like it's concrete on concrete, right? And that buffer for us is more on the retail side. You would see like on 14 Mile where it's like, sidewalk abutting up to the retail, but to create that little landscape buffer from the site kind of creates more of that, housing feel instead of a retail feel.
Maybe this is a time to ask this question,
Sure.
if not, just
Yeah.
hunt me till later, but going back to a question we had earlier, can you explain that, that main residential area that you're gonna have out on the front side, facing Main Street, right?
Yep.
So is it permanent, it looks like privacy that's gonna be there, or is there gonna be patio space? Like,
So
I'm
it's
trying to get an
not
idea,
really
like, how to
patio
walk past
space.
it.
And we could, I think that we have one slide that may show a picture. It's more of ingress egress, where if you wanted to go eat or shop downtown, you could just kind of walk back and go to your unit. Seems to be the hot item in other cities where people, don't have to park in their parking lot or get out from the side of the building or the lobby and then go shop at the grocery store and walk back. They can walk out from their unit and walk right back into their unit. So, again, that's not a requirement on our end, but we thought it would create more walkability on the street. And we thought that'd be an economic benefit, instead of having to walk to the lobby and then walk out from there, where someone could just get ready and walk out from their unit if they want and walk back to their unit.
But won't they eventually just use it as a patio and there'll be only a matter of time before chairs are out there or
Well, it's-
rugs
yeah,
or,
I didn't-
you know.
It sounds like there's not gonna be
There's
space
not
for
much.
that.
There's only about two and a half feet.
Yeah, it's only 2.5 feet. I mean, it's really like this much.
And there's no barriers between.
Oh.
them, and it's
Yeah,
not too-
It's not and that's something on our end. We wouldn't.
Plus management wouldn't-
Correct. The management, there would be no grills out there, parking or tables or chairs. It's too small of a space. It'd start to obstruct the sidewalk if that was there.
Right, and that's why I think in the plan, it looked like there was some like privacy green, small blockage, right?
Sure.
It's actually right in front of the building.
Just, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I was just trying to get an idea of the space, thank you.
And we can show you guys more drawings of that just to get your comfort level on that as well. And so going into our deviations, the first one is the 3rd floor 10-foot setback. And so we're not asking for too much of a deviation because it's still set back 10 feet from the road or from our property line, but it's not set back as a 10-foot balcony. To create a 10-foot balcony in those units is like from here to that, just a huge balcony and huge space up there, which restricts the size of the units. So we've created, I think it's a 5 or 6 foot balcony or, terrace, let's call it, with 4 feet off the street. So if someone's walking down the street, you still get the visual effect. And that was the point of it, is my understanding, is to not feel like the building is on top of you, right? So you still have that same setback for people walking on the street, but it also, it creates a more usable, functional space upstairs to make their units a little larger and their balcony a little bit smaller.
And with the ordinance, doesn't it read it's 10 foot from the property line,
I
right?
think we're okay with that, right?
Oh, so it is?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That one doesn't count.
Okay, so that's not a,
Initially, I thought the building was gonna go up, it was gonna step in 10 feet, but no, apparently it goes by the property line.
gotcha.
So wherever you're standing there, going in, I don't know what depth you would have at that point.
So we're not asking for deviation.
No,
anymore
no,
on
that one.
Okay, so that's, we discussed the first floor commercial liner. Again, we're in discussions internally about adding a co-working space potentially for that corner. It really depends out how the lobby kind of lays out and if there's enough space for that.
Would the lobby like strictly a lobby space, or are
Yeah.
you thinking like a gym or anything else for?
So there's a gym on the second floor, I believe, or first floor. Yeah, there is a gym, a recreational space. There's storage lockers in the building as well. But the lobby is just the lobby, just for residents to go and walk in. And there's access from it both on Bowers and Main, and then from the other side, obviously from in the lot. The vinyl fence, we'll get into that. We can have our engineer kind of discuss why we went with a vinyl fence instead of the masonry there. And parking obviously is the biggest variance that we're asking for. You know, and I think we have a few slides on parking. If we want to discuss it now, we can skip to those slides, or we can get to it kind of after. Let's see where it's at. Why don't we get to that at the end, and let's just keep going through in order, and then we'll go through parking. Yeah. Last 2 slides. Yep. Housing demand. We all know there's housing demand in Clawson. Again, we think that this site is prime for housing. We think it really adds benefit to the rest of the downtown. There is a lot of, hopefully this site can be one of the catalysts, like the ACE has been, right, to create some of those vacant spaces across the street from us, or, you know, kind of on 14 Main to increase, you know, new development here in the city. Infrastructure improvements, we will be upgrading the stormwater management on site, create 8 new spots on Main Street. We looked at Bowers. We had to discuss the width of the road and just to make sure with the city that we can add on Bowers as well. Blight and vacancy elimination. Obviously, this site has been vacant for years. So tearing that down and adding something new and useful for the city. And interim use in public safety is a lot of times with these new developments and these buildings, especially because this was a bank, Oakland County SWAT, the police, the fire can use this before it's demoed to train, you know, in you know, whether it's a fire or hostage situation or whatever they want to do. And that's just a use that we offer to them if they want to take it. And usually they do take it. And obviously that would be worked through the city of Clawson. Elevations, I'll let Jason kind of take over.
Hello, Jason Krieger with Krieger Cloud Architects. And so what I'll do is I'm going to walk everybody through the building as it's designed today. And Nick, could you see, I was just in good work. It doesn't hit the TV. Could you go back to the site plan, please? What I want to do is just walk you guys through the site plan, the floor plans. Just make sure you guys are following.
I think the floor plans are next.
Go back to the site plan real quick.
This.
Site plan. It's like third slide. There you go. Okay, so this right here is the proposed site plan. We've been talking about it here tonight, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through it before I get into the floor plans to make sure everyone's following what's going on. So north is pointed to the left. Bowers is on the right side, Lincoln's on the left. And what we've been talking about along here is it's a building that's really, it's flanking the site, or I should say the property lines, which is part of what the master plan is asking for. The parking's hidden behind the building. We have the 8 new parking spaces that we're proposing along Main Street. And then you can see on the right along Bowers, where that's now available space for potential 5 to 6 parking spaces, whereas right now it's all driveways. So that right there is what we were talking about there. What I want to show you here is on the lower right portion of the plan, which would be the southwest. That's our lobby entrance, some kind of amenity space. We're still programming all that. It's a couple thousand square feet. The entrance into that space is right in the corner of the building there. So folks could walk right into the corner, go into the lobby. There's a mail room, other amenities. There's also another entrance to the left where you can see the stairwell, which is farther to the north. It is a double loaded corridor building that stacks all the way up. And then we'll go to the floor plans now. Okay, so this right here is a colored version. You can see the purple is the amenity space that we were just talking about. And then you can see the mix of 1s, 2s, and studio units that flank the corridor. I want to point out that there's only about, like we said, 2.5 feet from those doorways that go out to Main Street to where the property line is. We intentionally pushed the building back a little bit to give it some relief. So we could do some kind of greenery along the sidewalk versus having it directly on the sidewalk. It's better for people walking by. It's also better for the residents. As mentioned, the doors are not mandatory, but we think that they'd be wonderful because it allows these folks to immediately walk outside. We see it as a little amenity for them. In other communities where we've done something similar, it's been requested and it's been well received and it's been successful. Next slide, please. So as you go up the next floor, it just stacks. So those units stack up on units below. Next slide, please. So this is the top floor and you can see where the building's brought back in about 7.5 feet, but it's 10 feet from the property line. And these units are really going to be very, very cool. They're almost, penthouse-ish. I'm going to say that, not penthouses, but the length of the unit faces the outside wall. So you get way more glass. You have these really nice large balconies. So we think it's a real special feature to the building. Next slide, please.
Sorry, one question.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell in the picture versus I know there was some breakdown in it. Look at it in detail, I guess. But the studio sizes, are those uniform or are those going to be different? Like, so the ones facing Main look a little bit larger.
They will be different. Yeah, they will be different. Yeah, absolutely. So getting into the nuts and bolts, we want to try and keep everything as similar in size as possible. It's more efficient. It's easier for everybody. But because we're stepping back, we're going to have some different units. And this is a conceptual plan, so we're still working through some of that stuff. This is really us saying, hey, here's our intent. What does everybody think? Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides are renderings. Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, we missed that one. Okay, so these are the exterior elevations, and this is on Main Street. The top one there is on Main Street, looking straight at the building. On the lower right portion of that elevation, you'll see a lot of storefront glass. That's our lobby and amenity space. So we want that to have a lot of light coming in, views in and out. You can also see to the left of that where those are the units that can walk outside. And then you see those little green boxes. Those are just bushes in front. So again, we wanted to try and create a little bit of relief, but we don't want somebody's window or door right on the sidewalk. So that's what we're achieving there. And then you can see as you go up, the building steps in on the left and right. It also steps back off the property lines. We have primarily masonry on this facade. And as you go up, we'll have a mix of, we'll make sure we comply with the ordinance or any kind of design guidelines in the city. It could be, we looked at a standing seam panel. We looked at James Hardy siding with board and battens, but it's all going to be very high-end materials. These folks are long-term holders. They're not going to flip this property. So we want to make sure that we give them something that's going to last a very long time and look beautiful in the city. See the next one down. So you can kind of see the pattern of the masonry turning the corner. That's on the north. And then the shaded area to the left, that's on the south. That's farther back. Next sheet. So the top elevation faces east. That faces the neighborhood. So we'll have the brick on the corners. We have softer materials on the inside. So more of the hardy siding. just to try and relate to the neighborhood better. And then the south elevation is the one right there below it. Again, we're working through all this, but what we want to illustrate here is a very high-end quality building for the town. Let's go to the renderings. So these are just some aerial views showing you the shape, size, massing of the building. You see it's not overpowering. It seems to be fitting in quite well with the surrounding neighborhood in the town. Next slide. Just another view. And then here's some renderings from the street. Yeah, literally, yeah, it's from this building, looking there, yeah. You know, the color palettes, you know, we want it to be kind of darker and richer. You know, we're inspired by the brick on this building. It's like a nice brown brick. And, you know, what we're going to make sure of is that we're going to study how this building fits in with the other neighboring buildings around. So it nestles in very well. So in this rendering, you know, we're showing parking lot screening with bushes, and we can explore that. Some of those items that were in the report, it's just the site plan we had was so preliminary. You know, we just didn't have a lot of that stuff in there. But what we would do is make sure that, you know, as much of that, if not all of it's, you know, not an issue at all. And we'd screen that parking, and we'd make sure that the lighting complies, signage complies. Those are things that we never really ask for deviations on because they're very easy to achieve. Trees. Next slide.
So obviously, as we've discussed, the code asks for 90 spaces for 66 units. We wanted to show both a few projects in a few cities that have very similar size units. This one's anywhere between 27 and 72. You have Vester Flats in Ferndale, a project in Royal Oak, Ann Arbor, and another one in Royal Oak. They're all around the same parking ratio as ours. And going into that, because this is an infill site, this is not an industrial site or some kind of large 2, 3, 4 acre site off the beaten path, right? With infill sites, the last thing you want is a huge parking lot and a few units, right? You want this to be accessible. You want density. You want people to be able to walk out of their building and go downtown, right? So, all of these have ratios between 0.79 and 1.35.
Can I,
Yes.
ask a question? I can't see those.
Yeah.
That's not in our packet, right? This is.
It is in your packet.
No.
Oh, that's not in the, no,
Yeah,
it's
I
not in your
didn't think
packet.
so. Troy, you said this is in Royal Oak
So-
and in Ferndale. How close are those to public parking that's accessible all night long?
I don't know the answer. I don't think Royal Oak. Ferndale's right next one does not allow overnight parking.
Yeah, they do.
Did you allow in Ferndale?
Yeah, so does Royal Oak. I don't know if they do in their parking structure. but-
Gotcha.
And Troy does too, I believe, right?
Well, it's Troy Street, I think.
Troy Street, yeah, not Troy
Right.
the city.
But, so all those have on-street parking throughout the cities, it seems, and they also have parking structures local.
Correct.
Okay,
Going to the next slide. So most infill sites and cities have gone to, for example, Ferndale's 1 parking spot per unit, Madison Heights 0.75 for a studio or 1 bedroom, 1.13 for a 2 bedroom. Ann Arbor has no parking requirement, and the city of Detroit is 0.75. Again, it's for the walkability. And I want to make it clear also as well that it really is a burden on us more than the city, in the sense that our residents won't be able to park publicly overnight anyways. They'll be ticketed, they will be towed, right? So we have 66 units and 69 spots. If we have to discount a few units because someone doesn't have a car or doesn't need 2 spots for their 2 bedroom, right? That's going to be on our backs, right? I don't, will people park on the street overnight? Potentially. Will they get a ticket day after day and then they stop doing that? They will, right?
I'm complaining to the city that there's not enough parking.
Well, every person that gets a unit will have one parking space, right?
Yeah, we've kind of talked over parking many times with every developer that comes here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we can get your feedback would be helpful, but
Parking is a challenge in Clausen
Sure.
currently.
Yeah, it's only gonna get
And-
worse.
And that's my biggest concern with this whole
Yeah.
plan, quite frankly. That's a lot lower than what we would typically.
sure.
And it is a burden on the city as well. If you want to take it off your hands, then it becomes a burden for the city and all residents. That, you know, there's certain commercial uses now that park within the neighborhood. There's always issues, always. So knowing, that's why we represent the city,
No,
right?
understood.
But we've been lectured a lot of times about our parking, and all developers want less parking, which I don't I don't fault you for it, but that's one thing I'm just not looking to waiver that 22 spaces. I don't see it feasible. The city is growing. This, you know, downtown is growing in terms of building out. Commercials on fire right now in the market. I just don't see how we'll sustain a 22 under.
Yeah, you actually have 77 rooms though.
77
Rooms,
bedrooms,
yeah.
correct.
You know, there's not even enough parking for.
Correct,
Each
but,
bedroom.
but
Each
each bedroom would have, so each unit would have a parking pass. It'd be obviously a closed parking lot for our residents only, right? So you would have, if you get a 2-bedroom, you would know I get 1 parking space. And if that loses us 2 people who have 2 cars, that's gonna hurt me, right? Is it gonna help someone who says, well, I'll take a 2-bedroom and 1 will be my office because I'm work from home and 1 is my bedroom? That's the resident, you know, we would prefer obviously with 11 2-bedrooms, right? So, but if someone comes to us and says, we have 2 cars, we need 2 spaces, our response is, sorry, we can't have you as a resident, right? I mean.
What about visitors? What do you think?
So visitors would be public parking and the overnight would be on them, right? That they can't park overnight. I mean, that's.
You're not planning on having visitors overnight at all?
Yeah, you're not planning on having 2 occupants in a
Yeah.
2-bedroom unit though? I mean, that's what you're kind of saying.
No, I understand that, right? Is it possible they have two occupants in 1 car? It is. Is it obvious, you know, but are they gonna get 2 parking spaces in our lot? They're not, right? And if they have 2 cars, they might have to find a place to park their car. I don't know the answer to that, but I know.
It falls on the city then. It doesn't fall on you
But
guys.
how does
It's
it
not
fall
about-
on the city?
Because then those residents come to the city and say, we don't have anywhere to park. And then, I mean, secondly, do you know that the city is right sizing our schools and looking to fill those schools with more children? You're essentially saying there's not gonna be families or children or people that have more than 1 car that are occupying your units.
Yeah, well, so if I may, the target demographic for this site is a young professional and a young professional. Statistically speaking, over the last few years, you're finding a number of people who are deciding not to have cars. They're not deciding not to have insurance. And if you actually look at the numbers, to get an Uber or a Lyft, it's actually more beneficial for them because more and more people are working from home. So our target demographic is a young professional, for someone who very often has that ability to work remote and or is using ride sharing more often than not. You'll see that's why the focus is to have those units on the street. More often than not, they have either electric bikes and or scooters and or unicycles and so that's what we're focused. That's why we built way more studios in 1 bedroom.
Yeah, well, but
Count
to,
on that. My wife and I are both professionals and we own 4 cars.
well, and to
We
be
can't
honest,
count on something like that on your part.
No, I understand, but this project wouldn't be, if you guys came, you would say, well, we can't, this is not for us, right? You know,
right.
that's what we're saying is you would look at this and say, we're 2 professionals, you have 3 vehicles, 4 vehicles. This project doesn't work for us. Let's look at a different project or let's get a house. Let's do something else, right?
Yeah, and me being an ethnic person as well, I have my parents that come over all the time, so it's really, I'm not your target at all, right?
But in terms of benefiting the city, we would want, that speaks to how your project would benefit our city. you're looking to benefit our city in a certain way, but it doesn't seem to align in those ways in terms of parking, non-driving young professional, I guess, that there's just, it doesn't align as far as like, what benefit does that bring?
Well, I think it
Well-
brings someone to Clawson, right? And they can live there for a year or two and say, I really like this city. Let's buy a house here.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's move into this neighborhood because we really enjoy living in Clawson. This downtown is great. The city is great. I just got out of college. I'm here. I live in this building for 2 years and say, I want to stay in Clawson. I want to start a family in Clawson. Let's buy a house on Bowers. Let's buy a house on Lincoln, right in this area. I mean,
You're
that's.
not gonna buy a house there. Okay, think.
Can I?
So,
Yeah, can
yeah.
I chime in?
Yeah.
'Cause I don't mean to, hopefully this body doesn't feel like it's attacking you, because we haven't had this issue before, and there are parking constraints across our city, so hopefully you guys understand that. But you made a point, I mean, we've addressed this before, I think. It sounds like, because when I looked at this first plan, I was surprised that like 40% are studios, and we're talking about fairly small studios and things like that. So I believe you said part of your decision to have those smaller units was because of the parking requirement.
No, the target demographic is for a young professional. And that young professional, quite honestly.
Sorry, and I
it's-
understand that. I was
yeah.
just saying, you'll get pushback for this type of development because we want to promote more families, right? So those small units don't promote that. But what I'm hearing is that you're unable to have more 2-bedroom units because they require more parking.
Well, it's interesting. It's hard for me as a 50-year-old guy. When I was young, freedom was defined as me getting my driver's license and getting a car. That's just not the case anymore. My daughter who's in college and my youngest who's in high school, more than half their friends have not gotten their driver's licenses. And the world's changed quite a bit in the fact that they're either just leaning on their friends, they're more, green conscious world about being as ESG as possible, right? And so the thought is that it's not considered the desire or need, being that they can just click a button on their phone and get a car. And when they need it, or if they're going on a longer trip, then they get a zip car. And that's what's being done. You can see these cars all over Ann Arbor. And it's something that we're just seeing that trend go more and more to the point where you can even see and talk to many of these insurance brokers and agents. They're going to be shifting away from insuring cars to insuring individuals who would be getting a ride sharing vehicle or I guess you would say a fractional, so that they can get it just when they need it and the car just shows up. And this is going to be happening over the next couple of years.
I think one other thing to talk about is the diversity in housing, right? I know Clawson has done some RFPs.
Please.
Oh,
People at home have.
yeah, no problem. I know one thing that Clawson has done is the RFPs for the old school buildings to create more different types of housing, right? And again, I think the diversity in housing downtown is you will have smaller units with less parking in your core downtown, right? You don't want big parking lots in your core downtown is usually the theory. And then you can have other infill sites where you have 6, 7, 8 acres where you can do townhomes that have 4 cars per unit and things like that. But in the core downtown, I mean, to do a building, I think our count would go to like 20 or 30 something units at this site, which is just not feasible for both downtown and for us to build a project only having 30 units on that large of a site in a core, a CC density
Well,
area.
that's why you supplement with a commercial use that would offset some of that parking with the use of the building, right? Like,
But where would they park as well?
well, just same as Ace, you're not a hard requirement for as you are for like a 2-bed needing 2 car spaces. That's essentially the way that it would work, is you would offset that with a commercial use
But-
within that building.
Understood, but I think that loses the functionality of the building.
We're
So,
talking about city center and that's the use.
no,
right?
I understood, but
Yeah.
if you add, let's call it a restaurant or a brewery down there, where do 60, 70, 80 cars?
Well, that's a
Might
little
park.
bit less strain on the city street parking and the city municipal parking than somebody that's looking to park there all night, bring their groceries in, bring their children
Yeah,
in,
it's
those
limited
kinds of things.
Time parking, right?
It's
versus overnight
very
parking.
much so.
So we do have some
So-
availability, but
So I mean, I don't want to keep going.
No,
back.
I
You guys have made all your great points.
Sure.
We've heard, I mean, not to be, but we have heard them prior to you.
Understood.
It was, but can we kind of step
yeah, I
forward,
just
I
want for
guess?
the record to be able to confirm why they chose, this makeup of units, because I think we get pushback, right, from residents around the city looking for more family build, but it is in their eyes, obviously as a business, they
Mhm.
want to maximize the footprint they have. But we are constraining them with our parking requirements. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just trying to understand that because I know we've talked about in the past. And it's good to have an example kind of on record. Because I do think that this space needs to be developed, whether it's this exactly as it's presented or something different. We might be able to meet somewhere in the middle. But I understand and just wanted to kind of record the reasons behind, where I saw there being a lot of efficiency studio units. More so than I think the market demands, but trying to understand your perspective
Sure.
is helpful because you guys are experts in development. I'm not.
Exactly. And one, I just wanted for the meeting as well, again, this is to get to that next meeting to discuss the deviations. So, we just obviously want your feedback so we can go back to the drawing board and get it, so I just wanted to, obviously make it clear again, we're not voting on the deviations today just to
Right.
get to that
Yeah,
next step to
we were
get
just
to that
trying
meeting.
prepare you for questions you
Understood.
may get from the
And I'm
public
sure
as
we
well.
will. No,
And this, it ultimately speaks to your overall benefit to the city in a PUD. You're coming here because you believe you're providing a benefit with the use of this building and this space. And that's part of it. Are we willing to take on 22 spaces of parking as a city because it's a benefit to them or to us, I guess?
And we've been through this before with other places and
Yeah.
usually it might be 4, 5, 6 parking spaces that they're lacking.
Sure.
And we,
That's what I was gonna say. I
Work
mean,
with that, but 21 spots.
The volume is,
to me is a overpowering
Parking, so-
number. Hate to do it, but what if I suggest you remove the 3rd floor of the building?
I'm sorry, may I speak through the chair? Are you the chair, Gregory?
Yeah.
Or Mr. Kucera? My name's Eric Toom. I'm part of the team here.
Okay.
I want to kind of stay away from parking just for a second. I think we are here specifically to talk about the qualifications of a PUD.
Mhm.
Okay, and I know if you decide that this qualifies for a PUD to move forward, we'll talk about parking, definitively. But I want to make a comment that's not about public benefit, but is rather about the master plan. So as I understand, the planning commission is here to serve, to adhere to specific requirements within the master plan and then to zone appropriately according to the future land use map. Okay, Michael went over some of the PUD qualifications, but there's consistency with the master plan and zoning. I want to detail on literally for you, just for my own reading of the zoning code as it relates to this site. And specifically, there are 2 studies that were done. There's the downtown master plan that was done in 2015. And there was another plan that was done, I believe, in 2021, if I'm right, Nick. Or 2018, whichever year it was, specifically related to the downtown plan and the future land use map. It talks about recommending building form, building materials, parking circulation, expansion of downtown as noted in the plan. This is specifically an expansion of the downtown through multifamily use. There's also very high quality building materials in a time when, all honesty, the market's not really that great. Everybody knows where the interest rates are. Everybody knows where things are going. And this is a significant investment into the city to expand the downtown. That's first. Second is in the master plan, specifically on page 58, it says revitalization along main road corridors. This is a main road corridor. You have a blighted building that's sitting there that's been obsolete. It's been for sale for a while, and there hasn't been a bank building in that or a retail banking building or use in that building for quite some time. This is a productive use, bringing 66 units, potentially 75 to 100 separate residences. Second, I want to say utilize appropriate flexible zoning on main corridors to encourage reuse. PUDs is specifically that. That's stated on page 58 of your master plan. So what we're asking, and I understand 22 spaces, 21 spaces is a big ask. It's a big ask, but if we're talking about transitioning and extending the downtown, the way to do that is through flexible zoning. The PUD is the appropriate mechanism for that. Thirdly, future land use goal of encouraging multifamily and diverse housing options. Okay, the school district right now is out for an RFP, I believe, to build a bunch of single family homes just down the road over here. So you're going to get a lot of new single family homes. You're going to right size the school district through that. You're going to get more students that are coming through. In addition to that, there needs to be an opportunity to fulfill attainable missing middle housing. The state's talked about it. Michigan's statewide housing survey talks about this. And I think it's really important to note that while the unit mix of studios versus ones versus twos, the opportunity, whether it's a millennial, whether it's a young professional, whether it's an ethnic young professional, whether it's someone that can only afford an 80% AMI unit, to have the opportunity to live in downtown Clawson. And so what we're trying to achieve here is that opportunity through diverse housing options. So when you look at your zoning code, I think this, or when you look through the master plan, this specifically addresses really a lot of the things that you guys are discussing in your master plan. So before we go into parking and the plug and pull of what we're willing to finalize in the PUD, I just think it's important to note, like, you're, as a body, like, we're here to adhere to this master plan to facilitate what the master plan is seeking. And I think this development specifically relates to that. And I mean, it's true. And so,
I don't want to dispute in all of this.
okay, wonderful.
Well, except for
I
we've
mean,
done a lot of
I
infill.
did not hear any of this things coming out of us disputing any of your reasons. Your reasons are all valid, so are theirs.
Great.
We're talking about a problem that we continuously have in this town.
Well, and
has
it's great. And
long-term.
it's a great, honestly, it's a great problem to have. Like, you
Great problem to have.
I think it is. I mean, the fact that you have this demand, you have this desire for the parking, you need the parking, is a problem that needs to be figured out in the future. It's in future
And
proofing.
we have the
We are,
demand.
you are
demand
the
by-
future.
We don't want to add to the problem.
You are the future. That's what we're talking about.
And we have the demand by builders on us, not necessarily residents, and not necessarily,
yet.
not necessarily. It's the builders that are approaching us, trying to put in a structure. And like I was trying to say earlier, would it kill you guys if you took the third floor off the building, just had fewer apartments in there? Would knock down your parking spaces. Is that a non-viable alternative? I'm thinking you're trying to put 3 gallons of water in a 2-gallon bucket.
Understood. And that's something we can go to the drawing board and look at and come back and let you know if that makes financial sense. I mean, that's something that we have looked at in the past, and it didn't quite work for a site that size and how much we have to pay for a site that size in Clawson.
Mhm.
If
If we didn't have an ordinance that said you couldn't put in a 4 or 5 story building, you'd probably have a rinse in front of us for that. Because that's happening, is put as much in as you can possibly load into something. And that's why we limit it to 3 stories with a setback on it. But for this site, parking is gonna be a big nightmare. I don't see how you're gonna get around that.
Understood, and something we can go back and look at and see what we can do on that side of things. I can't tell you it works with, 40 units or 45 units and adding, maybe some retail. I don't know the answer to it because that's not what we've kind of built out in our model, but it's something we can look at.
Yeah, that's your business. You know what you can give a
Sure.
check on the thing, but
Even if it was like a 1-to-1 ratio, I'd feel more comfortable.
A 1-to-1 for beds to understood. And it's something, again, we could look at.
Yeah.
The problem ends up being, just to be obviously honest and transparent, is the unit size gets too big and the rent gets too high for, you can't have a 2-bedroom that's 1,300 square feet. The rent just gets too high, right? So, and again, you also want a building that kind of covers that main street to Bowers as well. You don't want a building that's half that size sitting there and the rest of the lot is just parking or vacant, right? So
So how much are your
understood.
units gonna rent for?
I think the AMI,
That's irrelevant.
yeah, I mean,
Well, I mean, but I don't think, when you say the rent's too high, are you saying according to the demographics of
It's-
Clawson or?
That's irrelevant even for him to say that, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, so do you guys want to just go into questions or should we, I would love to move on from parking because you know how we feel.
no, I understand.
Me,
No, I get your
I think
concerns.
we've been clear that that is a huge part of the overall idea of what a benefit might be to the city is the parking. But I don't know.
It's a beautiful place. I mean, we appreciate you coming here and bringing the investment, but these are some of the constraints that we hear from the residents. We deal with we have three larger developments going on right now, and each one of them, this is a topic.
Understood. No, I mean, we understand your concern as well. It's not unheard. We definitely understand.
So
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
So these would be your challenges if we go ahead and do the qualification
Sure.
approval, because then you have public comments. And
Understood.
it goes to council as well, so it'll be expanded even more.
Correct.
So this is
Correct.
definitely a pain point for our citizens.
Yep, understood.
So we're just trying to.
No,
prepare you in advance.
I understand. No,
One
We
more
get it.
concern that I have, if I may.
Yeah.
First is a question, how many doors will there be along Main Street, you think?
I think it's on
Every
one of the
department will-
elevations. I think there's maybe
Eight,
6 to 8 doors. I'm not,
virtually the same amount of the parallel parking that you want to add.
potentially. I think it just kind of worked out that way for how big a space is, but
Right.
yeah.
My fear that what's gonna happen is those parking spaces will be hostage to people that live there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in like downtown Detroit that has zero parking.
Except for the nighttime, there will be public at 2 AM.
Well, but people in Detroit, like when they're having a lot of issues now because they have to walk 2 miles for their groceries to, carry their groceries home when there's events and those residents rely on those parking spots,
They
like
will?
you said. Yeah, they will. And they're not overnight, unfortunately, but in
Understood.
terms of PUDs, we've also talked a lot as a city and throughout master plan about the need for green space in PUDs as an opportunity to add certain green space benefits to the city. I just don't feel like this project has, and maybe nobody's made you aware of those things, has taken that into consideration. One big thing with Roth, when they were doing that PUD was, where are you gonna walk your dogs? And they did end up, adding some green space, but it's these residents, if they have pets, they're all gonna be walking their pets elsewhere. There's nowhere for you to even have a common space to walk your pet or anything like that. And that's why it's hard, because you're essentially downtown and you don't need a yard, right? But I do think that that's something we seek as well.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I just want to touch base on a couple of things that we spoke about so far tonight. And so with in regards to the green space in downtown, I mean, technically they don't have to provide any
They don't.
in downtown. And I mean, it's an improvement. And as Joe mentioned earlier, and they shared in their plan that there's no modern stormwater detention on the site. And that's a huge thing that they're going to be adding there is underground detention. I don't know if you guys remember, I think maybe 3 meetings ago, Joe gave that presentation on alternative stormwater detention methods. One of those larger underground, I'm not an engineer. I don't know what they're called. Retention items is what they're going to put underneath the parking lot. And so they're going to be able to take on a significant amount of water comparatively to other areas downtown. And then just a couple other items is, I know you mentioned the no commercial use. And part of the reason that they're not having commercial is to support our existing commercial and retail in downtown that we have seen quite a bit of turnover in the last couple of years with some businesses. I can name, unfortunately a handful right now that have come and gone in the last couple of years. And so instead of trying to have new spaces to compete with our retail, they want to provide residents to support those retail businesses in downtown. And so I just want to touch base on a couple of things that I've mentioned so far.
I mean, Nick, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone. The building, conceptually, it's great, but there's a couple of things that I think there are sticky points, right? That I think there just needs to be some flexibility. We need to, I think there's some common ground that we can reach somewhere. But, I don't want to go back to the parking thing. I mean, that's something I think that they're going to think about it and see what else might be available. But I'm not arguing, I wouldn't at least argue that this is a bad idea. I think it's great. I want it to succeed. I want to figure out a way to make it work with our concerns, right?
And I think they want to make it work as well and take your concerns and make a plan that can make all 9 of you and the 2 absent members as well happy with it. And, parking in downtown is, I think they mentioned earlier that it's a good problem to have, and I agree, right? If we are drawing in this many people from not just Clawson, I mean, you go to Gus's Snug or Grand River Brewery, it's not just Clawson residents going there. You got people from Troy, Royal Oak, and farther, and that's a great thing because if they come to Clawson, they're going to see Old Port. I'm going to go to Old Port in the morning, and so when we're doing our master plan right now, and we are looking at how to increase parking along 14 Mile, that's a long. I don't want to say long term because we're looking at right now. That's something that we're looking at. We're looking at how we can maximize parking in our existing lots. And so, unfortunately, we do our best to plan for the future. That's what this body does, right? And so I think we are just now catching up to where we need to be. And so there's a couple of things that we have to do in order to make, development good and to make sure we have quality downtown for parking.
Right,
for
because
people.
that's a lot of people come here from Royal Oak because they hate Royal Oaks parking, right? Like I hear that all the time. Like I don't even go out there anymore because they got those, like, we're trying not to do that here. So, necessarily, right, with the meters and but thank you, Nick. But I would like for us to be able to like discuss other points of things too.
Yeah, to get us back on track on the conversation on the qualification decision, right? What other concerns do we have, right? So I think we beat the parking to death for a little bit.
Yes.
But what other concerns do we have?
Yeah, I think parking is gonna, obviously, your main problem, following
Final
under,
phase was one thing I was concerned about.
under screening, yes, it says that, it's not on the full landscaping plan, that, the applicant is seeking a vinyl fence in lieu of the wall as part of the PD. Isn't it an ordinance in town that you have to have a cinder block wall or concrete wall of 6 foot high between commercial and residential properties? I thought that's
Pretty
a city
standard, yeah.
ordinance, so.
They're asking for relief on that requirement.
And trust me, that when the neighbors come in. they're
Yeah, that's
they're
not gonna
they're
happen
allow it.
either. Yeah.
We've been through this route,
So-
and they don't want a 4.5 foot ball fence.
Understood. No, 6 feet. We understand 6 feet. Right now, I believe it's a chain link fence.
Yeah.
Right, it's a chain link fence currently. We see that as an upgrade of that. And then if we want to get into cinder block, I don't know if that's a kind of, a design. It,
Can it be cast in place concrete?
We've done that in plenty of places around town.
Let's discuss that.
okay, we can discuss that
Early
one.
in the discussion, you said you went to that because it was going to impact on your parking.
Correct.
The ugly term.
Yeah, because you need footings and it increases your barrier and then it would shrink your parking lot. But if you can do, okay, we could talk through that.
That's an opportunity because that's definitely a contention point with the neighborhood.
Understood.
We have to look at the impact of the neighbors, right? So
Understood.
that's another item you should think of.
Got it.
Landscaping, you said you had no problem with trees.
No problem with
That
trees.
shouldn't affect anything. EV parking, that's, to me, it's no big deal. It's
More the merrier, right? I'm an EV guy, so we gotta get some charging. I did have a question because, we have residents, we talk about changing the traffic pattern, right?
Sure.
So I'm not sure the condition of Lincoln or the other street too, or if there's a traffic study needed, because I think Lincoln has no stop signs through the whole cut through, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if that as we get longer into the discussion, that they should maybe do a traffic study too, if that's gonna increase the traffic pattern, and if the roads can handle it too, because I'm not sure how many potholes are in Lincoln. I'm getting good at dodging them. so-
Understood. And we've discussed that with a company to do a study if needed. Again, because it has to, their initial assessment was because there's Bowers and Lincoln and 90% of the traffic is going to go that way compared to down the other side. They didn't see any concern, but if we do need a study, we can do
Oh,
that as
I'm sure
well.
they'll go Rochester if they're smart.
Yeah.
Because downtown's,
All the way down Lincoln.
yeah, I mean, that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as it's configured on the building now, you can only come in off of Lincoln, exit onto Bowers. That's the way that the bank was always done.
It's just two ways.
This is 2 ways, both sides.
You're gonna be going both
Correct.
ways on the thing, yeah,
Yep.
which makes sense, yes. Anything else that we can give them a heads up about?
I mean, I still would, let's see, we already talked about the walkouts. I don't know how comfortable I am completely with those, but you said that's flexible. I mean, I guess I would,
When you guys come next time, are you guys gonna have actual plans or it's still gonna be preliminary?
No, it's still at this, it's
Still
still
at
at this
this
phase, yeah.
Okay.
Once we would, if and God willing, we get full PUD approval, then construction drawings would start for full construction and then for permitting and thereon.
And if I may, what's the rationale behind picking a PUD rather than going with the city center and the ordinances and going through the ZBA?
Yeah, and
I don't
that
think
was,
we
it was requested by the city to go.
It was,
Yeah,
okay.
so.
Yeah, so just to give some more background, so with the PNC site being city center, and then the home off of Lincoln being zone single family. And the boundaries of the downtown of the DDA, we couldn't combine those lots because the house on Lincoln is not technically part of the DDA. And so you can't for tax purposes, combine those. And so in order to, allow the parking for the site to be done, the PUD was decided because of both zoning districts.
Okay, makes sense. Reasonable enough, I suppose.
So next steps, right? So we had the discussion, we've talked about our concerns, gave them heads up on maybe some revisions they have to anticipate. So is there an expectation they're gonna come back? Or are we gonna have a motion to approve a qualification? What
Well,
we?
I actually have one more question.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I'm just going through my notes, but are these going to be condo conversions? Are these apartments? Do they each have their own?
We really shouldn't talk about that.
Well,
because
it's a long-term benefit to the city kind of thing, I would think.
We shouldn't talk about it. State law, we shouldn't talk about.
Oh, okay.
Whether they're gonna be for own or rent, we shouldn't talk about it.
So I guess back to the original question, the
Okay.
timing of when you're seeking our approval for qualification.
Well, I mean, I guess that is kind of the question that's in front of us is, do you want to see an evolution of the plan prior to having a vote on qualification? Or are you comfortable voting on qualification tonight? That's the question for you. If you want to see another iteration of the plan prior to voting on qualification, then you can tell them that. And then if you want to vote on qualification, you can do that too. And then when they come back to you, it will be for final. They will presumably have made some changes in response to this discussion. And then at that point, you'd be deciding whether or not they've made enough changes.
Absolutely. Qualification just starts the process of all these detail levels of public hearings and then we have to
Exactly,
vote
yeah.
on the final before it goes to council.
Exactly, right.
I'll leave it to my other commissioners to.
Well, because qualification will essentially have 4 votes. We're voting on each one, correct, Joe? One by one.
Well, you'd cite them all in the same motion. Yeah. And plus they also do have the brownfield thing. So that kind of.
Wait, what?
The brownfield, he mentioned the brownfield thing earlier, in your ordinance, sites that have qualified as brownfields actually, do qualify as PUDs. So, that there's like an auto qualification thing in there for that I didn't realize they had the brownfield qualification. But,
What does that mean?
Right.
Yeah, they're taking an abatement for 10 years. But what is
Right.
that? Does that mean that automatically qualifies as a PUD, you're saying?
so the way it reads in the ordinance, I'll just read it. Any development that includes a site designated as a brownfield by state or federal law, redevelopment or reuse of a functionally obsolete building, or removal of a non-conforming use or structure may qualify for consideration as a planned unit development. So
yes.
yeah, basically, yeah.
That doesn't mean they automatically are granted a
automatic,
PUD.
So regardless, if we grant this, we still have final say.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, you don't have, I don't actually have to approve a final PUD just because it's a
We're approving to
brownfield.
start the process, right? But the
Right,
council
exactly.
Also have vetting as well and approvals. So we
Right.
have multiple stages of this process. right?
Exactly, yeah.
Not really harm.
Ready, Mr. Chair?
Are you ready to make a motion
Yes,
for
sir.
it?
Motion to approve the what do we call it?
So, planned unit development qualification, and then you're gonna basically say that they are meeting the criteria for qualification.
Motion to the qualification criteria is met for the PUD for 150 North Main to recognize the substantial benefit, availability and capacity of public services, consistency with the master plan and zoning ordinance, and economic and neighborhood impact.
Support.
Motion, support, any changes? Okay, I'll take a roll call vote then, please.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
No.
Mr. Scott,
No.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
And then maybe just for their clarity, will you guys, I mean, I think they have an idea of what you're looking for in their next plan. Maybe just kind of make some of those points now, so they're aware of that. Or are you guys comfortable with what that? You guys are comfortable?
Around parking,
Okay.
around residential.
I just want to make sure that they were comfortable with what
You
the
guys have any
commission's looking for.
us to pretty much know where we're at, yeah. Okay.
And can we, Joe, maybe confirm the next step? Did you say it would be on the 9th that we'd have a public hearing? Or are we gonna
There
decide that
wouldn't be
later?
enough time with the holidays and everything, and they've got some other things to do, so the 9th is
It'll be
pretty
scheduled.
much, yeah, that's not gonna happen, but yeah, I mean, we'd be looking at a future meeting, and it basically depends on how quickly they turn things around, what deadline they meet, which meeting they'd be on.
And so the city will work with them directly on when that will be scheduled.
Yeah, exactly,
Timing.
yep.
Okay, so preliminary, welcome to Clausen.
We're already here.
Yeah, okay, stick around. We'll move on to agenda number 8 is the master plan discussion, 14 mile and main corridors.
Can you stop sharing the screen? Yeah.
So yeah, Joe and I are going to take turns presenting. I'll start and then Joe will finish.
The screen share up here.
Does this mean we're going for all nighter now or?
Yeah, I mean,
Try not
we had some good segue.
Yeah.
The entire audience fled, so I think we're good.
Yeah, well, they were kind of segueing us into it at one point, talking about the master plan and talking about mixed use and whatnot. So they kind of did a little bit of the background legwork. So thank you for that. Yeah, so just again, we're underway with the updating of everything, and we just wanted to hold this module. This is the module 5 of the process. Its goal is to just discuss the principal corridors of the city. Module 6 will kind of go a little further into a few of the corridors, which will be the kind of the BRD districts. But this module, we want to just talk about how Maine, both north and south, and 14 mile east and west are just kind of the strongholds for economic activity in the city. There are different changing market demands that invite this need for flexibility in terms of land use planning. Office, for one, is a major consideration, obviously. Really until recently, a lot of these corridors have kind of stayed put in the 80s, 90s kind of development style, or even older. I mean, some of them going back to the 50s. Obviously, as we see in some cases, the applicants kind of tonight kind of demonstrated in their own way for a downtown property that the blight and neglect of buildings can become kind of an issue when a building sits for too long, or has some old neglected site improvements that can be really detrimental to the surrounding quality of life and business atmosphere, business relocation, choosing to locate in Clausen. These are considerations. And then just broadly, kind of discussing mixed use. Mixed use can be a good first step for having both a residential population that can support the local businesses as well as the other way around too. Having businesses that provide the residential population things to do. Places for these residents to work. So just considering also the uses that maybe go into some of these corridors is also kind of one of your tasks as a planning commission in formulating a future land use plan and an implementation plan and then a zoning ordinance. So one of the kind of themes that we have as planners is we invite planning commissions to really kind of set the stage for what uses should go where without the special land use or like thorough discretionary approvals, because those approval processes can sometimes just create inconsistency and ambiguity for business owners who want to locate here. And sometimes it's best just to let them locate if the use has been determined to be appropriate. So kind of jumping into the corridors now, starting with the West 14-mile corridor. This has been identified for mixed use in the last master plan, the 2018 plan. The zoning districts to match that land use designation really never changed. It's kind of a mosaic going on now. There's a lot of I believe B1 through 3, and then there's also a lot of office and RM, multifamily residential districts. There's some small scale light industrial workshop uses, which kind of provide an interesting scenario I'll get into in a moment. There's some outdoor storage in some of the rear of some of these properties that can maybe be disruptive. Maybe that's not a use that's super welcome in the corridor. The parking is probably over provided for. If you go back on aerial imagery, just on Google Earth, that's a good segue into the next slide. These are just two examples, but you can really see even before the pandemic how, vast and how sparsely occupied these parking lots are on a business day in the middle of the day. So there's probably an overabundance of parking. I mean, if you go back on Google Earth any given year, you'll see a lot of open parking spaces in these businesses. This corridor also has a lot of abundant housing choices, especially there's a lot of single family and then there's a lot of multifamily. So I guess there's not a ton of missing middle, kind of 2 to 8 unit or so choices, but there's the new development that you had recently approved on can't think of the Knox, or what's the side street? I forgot.
The 14-mile one?
Yeah,
Yes.
the 14-mile
3
one.
houses.
Yep.
Yeah, 434.
Yep. So there's that development is a good example of kind of maybe where the market could head. But I mean, we do want to kind of consider mixed use here too, just because of this corridor having a lot going on. There's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of thriving businesses, and there's a lot of residential.
Are you talking all of 14-mile or you?
This is just west between actually I should have clarified between Manitou and downtown.
Manitou?
So not the very corner, not the very edge at Crooks. We actually aren't discussing those really large strip centers.
Okay, like the Westgate area.
Yeah, we're not
But
considering
how
Westgate
far
here.
East are you talking? Are you going past or you're stopping at Rochester or where?
So Washington. So this is just west 14-mile.
Oh.
We'll
just to
talk
Washington?
east as
Okay.
well. We'll talk east as
Oh,
well.
okay.
But we just want to go over these corridors, and feel free to stop me as I go, because I am kind of focusing on each corridor at a time.
Okay.
And we will be discussing east as well to Rochester.
Okay.
Next slide, Jill. So then considering kind of how this corridor's buildings and land uses could be designed. The block of kind of those workshop light industrial uses are really interesting. They're from the 50s and they were designed with kind of that pedestrian oriented design built towards the street. I think they allow for an interesting redevelopment opportunity. Hopefully, assuming a lot of these properties are clean and safe to like reoccupy for residential. There's about 4 commercial strip centers, and we're not including Westgate here in this discussion. That's its own large scale animal of land use planning. But there's a few small commercial strip centers. So if the planning commission does want to move towards a more building pedestrian oriented design in this corridor, kind of like what you see there in the illustration, you would need to kind of grapple with the fact that there could be some nonconformities created with some of these strip centers and the way they're set back a ways off the road with having a parking lot that interrupts kind of the street level interaction that a pedestrian has. That was obviously just a very 50s through 90s development style. So a lot of these lots are pretty deep too, so they do provide the ability to have both pedestrian front lot line oriented design as well as having a parking lot in the rear. Pretty much any of these properties have enough space for that. So that's kind of the summary on West 14. If we want to stop here and if you have any questions before I move on to East 14, which is the next.
Yeah, can you tell me where, do you know what street BR, like the BR1 district ends at and CC, like the city center begins? The color is really hard to tell on my map.
The city center ends at Washington.
It does.
Washington West.
Okay, so you're talking just outside city center.
Yeah, we're not talking about Washington West.
Okay, and so are you talking about converting that whole north and south just as a mixed use? Can you tell me what you're saying here?
Yeah,
Because you're
no,
like,
we're
we
just
bypass the planning commission and let the, Nick handle things and kind of change the use, right? So what are we talking?
Nick can't change.
Well, you
Yeah.
said sometimes it gets bogged down in site plans. At the
Oh,
beginning.
no, I'm just saying use. Yeah, so it's always helpful for a planning commission to determine through the planning process, which can be through an implementation plan of a master plan. If you want to relook at, appropriate zoning uses per district. And because sometimes when you have real like discretionary approval processes for a lot of land uses that maybe you've already discussed as not being detrimental to the public, you can kind of, it's just a best practice in the planning world. We recommend planning commissions determine what uses are principally permitted versus special land uses. And the special land use process can have inconsistencies with reviews. And it's always just helpful to lay out what kind of uses you think would be suitable for a corridor or for mixed use in this corridor and go from there. And then your focus is more the site plan process. So the building design, some of those.
Are you proposing maybe to add specific uses?
Yes,
Is this corridor gonna distinguish different than the B1 that's south of Main or south on Rochester or the BRD2? Because we've got, are we looking at like calling those different zoning uses, or you're just adding to them? Because if you add to B1, then that's gonna affect B1 everywhere, not just in this corridor.
Yeah.
That's my question.
And do you have something, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the existing master plan calls for moving toward an actual mixed use district down this corridor. So it would be something new. It wouldn't be B1 anymore. It would be a different distinction.
And we would essentially label everything from Washington to Manitou, North and South 14 Mile, its own entity of things.
And that's up to you. You know, maybe you do have some kind of a spectrum in a way where it kind of starts with more of a CMD look. And then it kind of transforms to a little bit lighter scale CMD, or maybe a B3, but not so much automobile oriented, maybe a little bit more housing choices. But just districts with more flexibility and more ability to do the kind of mixed use projects without without a ton of use regulations.
So do you have a specific use that you can point to within our zoning right now that you're saying to apply there? Or are you thinking we're rewriting, like we would want to write our own use?
And to take a step back, because I think this
Yeah.
gets confusing every time we
Yeah.
have these sessions. Can you clarify for me and this board? This is super informational and interesting, right? And I know we're in this process where we've collected data and we're
Mhm.
combining it with other data that we have internally. And then I don't know if it's you guys that will present potential options, or you would like this body to discuss that.
We want to hear your discussions. Yeah, we want to hear from
I
you.
always want to
Yeah.
like, what is our goal of every?
Yeah,
I
and
think we need to
that's a
stop
good
and
question.
say, what are the
Yeah,
goals before we
yeah.
start a conversation? So we all are thinking, you know, what do we want to take away from today's?
Yeah, and I
And
guess
apologize for taking you a step.
an
back,
extra
but I think-
slide here would have been nice to say, what are your thoughts? How do we convert kind of these discussion items into the master plan?
Well, I'm sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but I was trying to get to actually like the
Right, but we've had
source
these
of-
informational meeting. I'm not taking away from what you're doing.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're on the right path.
okay,
We're not taking away from this informational session, because sometimes we have informational sessions and we don't have any follow-ups or takeaways from that. Sometimes I bug these guys about like where we at the survey responses, when are we gonna incorporate that feedback? So we can be more tactical, right? And start coming up with proposed changes to the master plan. So I still struggle every time to think about what is the timeline and at what stage are we currently at? And I
Yeah.
apologize if I'm the only one that's.
well, maybe I'm
Done,
thinking
you
of
know.
the wrong thing here, because shouldn't we know what we're talking about doing to this corridor? When we're talking about a master plan, like,
Absolutely, I'm trying to figure out
Okay.
what stage we're at. Is it?
Oh, okay,
informational,
okay.
Digesting information? Is it brainstorming? Is it, let's just
Yeah.
develop tactical recommendations
I think
today?
it's brainstorming right
Yeah.
now and hearing your feedback as we then, as a staff team, work on developing content that then is then reviewed by you throughout the different stages of the planning process. Is that
Well,
correct, Joe?
Well, perhaps you guys, I think almost did it, it's on page 49 of our packet, and be your page 1 memo. You actually talk about, you know, it looks like recommendations of thought, right? You said review this extent to see how the projects can be facilitated. You talk about misalignment of some of the sites. So I think you were talking a little bit about your recommendations and goals on that first page of your memo.
Right, I mean, I think ultimately it's, it's thinking about what do we want each of these corridors to feel like? What do we want them to look like? What do we want, how do we want them to serve the city, right? So all of that has implications for how we then zone it after we've completed a plan.
Yeah, so think about this session, we're on the right path, right? This Redmond wants to talk about potential changes based on this discussion. Now, at the end of that, should we be documenting that information? Are you guys documenting that and coming up with
Right.
potential changes in language? I just want to
It's
make sure. like-
potentially for us to take
Okay,
that
Yeah, we-
feedback from you and then say, all right, here's what we heard
gotcha.
and here's what here's what we can
Helps.
present.
I didn't mean to get in a big loop, but I
Mhm.
just wanted to make sure I'm on the right path. Thank you.
So I guess that being said, what do you think about 14 Mile? So Commissioner Redmond has some,
I mean, well, I guess.
wants to know what kind of uses are, maybe what we're thinking are more acceptable.
So like along 14, there's B1 and on the south side, there's B3, RM2. I mean, are we trying to like take all of West 14 Mile and try to like come up with some type of, consistency on both sides, or
Yeah,
develop both east or north and south?
I think both sides are, that was the goal in 2018, it seemed like and I wasn't here, so I know some of you might have been. Both sides were mixed use one on that future land use plan. So I think there's a goal to be united on both sides of that corridor. So I would say probably going forward, that's probably what we're looking at too.
But is there something right now that's stopping someone from, I guess maybe this is a silly question, I should think about it first, but like, anybody could essentially turn one of those buildings into a mixed use building, and it's without necessarily, because we allow for residential in
believe-
certain zones. Are there certain zones that we don't allow
I
residential? to be?
believe residential is prohibited in some of them in this corridor. Is that
Districts in the office, yeah.
The which
B,
one?
the B district, so
Oh, the-
B1 through 3, and then
Right.
office as
So
well.
we could add a residential use potentially and not have to like revamp the whole map kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
I'm just throwing it out there as ways
Yeah.
that we can approach it, right?
So if we take the B1, B2, B3 and make it, reclassify it for some type of mixed use or more flexibility, it's kind of what we're talking about, right? Like reclassifying everything to make it more flexible to new development coming in. It
yeah,
could be residential, it could be commercial, it could be mixed, whatever.
and there's kind of two prongs to it though, because then the other kind of discussion item is design in terms of the site planning perspective. So I think the Bs are kind of prohibitive towards having some of that front oriented design and then having kind of that form based look that maybe CMD brings a bit of. So maybe it's kind of a use the B uses, but kind of replicate a kind of a more form-based design for the building frontage and how those look in parking lot in the rear yard. Some of those design considerations. So I'm just kind of wondering how you feel about those as well.
'Cause that's city owned right there, right? The green space.
That's right of way. Yep, the green spaces.
I mean, in I forget what height restrictions, we would potentially, and I think there's so much potential in a lot of these places, right? Especially for housing and mixed uses and things like that, but like you said, but then they'll just buy up next door too, and they really can make it work in ways if they want to make it work. I guess I feel like personally needs a lot of a discussion around it, but I know I don't want to go there right now.
Yeah, I mean, you can break it down into kind of bite-sized questions, like you're all familiar with this corridor, so you're there a lot, right? And I guess think about as you move through the corridor, you have these buildings that are right here, and then across the street, there's ones that are way back. And as you go down, particularly on the south side, as you're driving, let's say you're driving east, the south side is here, you have something that's here, and then something that's back, and then something else that's here, and then something that's back. Long term, as new development occurs through this corridor, what do you want for that area in terms of a feel? Do you want everything to kind of be consistent in terms of where it's located relative to the street? Is the kind of one far back, one up to the front, is that okay? Are we okay with that kind of patchwork feel? Do we want something more consistent in the future? And if so, what is that?
Rough thing to accommodate, I think, because we tried this many years ago here. First, we didn't like mansard roofs. We wanted to outlaw all those, and we decided, no, we can't have them all rip their roofs off. And we wanted zero setback on buildings. We don't like the fact that like Michael's Party Store is set back, he's got parking in front, we would prefer it level with everybody else. But you can't get these people to move the buildings unless the building's torn down.
Right. So that's part of the reason that you have to.
New construction now.
Right, exactly. That's part of the reason you have to be thinking in the very long term, because eventually all of these buildings, the way we consider development in the United States is generally that buildings will eventually reach a point of obsolescence. Now that could be actual functional obsolescence, or it could be market declared obsolescence, which is what a lot of obsolete buildings are in the US. When they're torn down, they're market declared obsolete. But as those things change in the future, and you might be looking 50 years out even, how do we want that to evolve? Do we want to get more to a consistent where everything's kind of lined up together? And the corridor itself has a feel to it, as opposed to a bunch of different districts in the corridor, each of which has its own feel, even though they're all on the same street frontage.
Well, those are all lined up in the picture, but we wish
Yeah,
they were lined
I was
up
gonna
about 15 feet
The only
closer
thing,
to the
like,
street, you know?
in the interim, when like these buildings do become obsolete, you know, and they are redeveloped, I mean, you're just gonna have, you know, and you do implement some type of new setback or whatever, you're gonna like it's gonna stagger dramatically, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like, how do you avoid that to get to the end result?
Right, yeah, I mean, to a degree, there's going to be a patchwork until everything redevelops at some point. So, you know, I mean, it's basically a matter of like deciding what form you want, and then setting that in place, and then allowing that development to happen over time. And if you kind of achieve the right balance of flexibility and form in your ordinance, that might actually make some of that redevelopment a little more appealing too. Whereas
Like, it stops, actually, so west of, was it Bywood? That's when those setbacks actually change to like more uniform.
yeah,
They're all
right,
tied to the sidewalks.
Yeah.
And then east of Bywood, now you have, you know, it's staggered,
exactly.
right? So like,
Yeah.
is it possible to break those, make two separate zones?
Sure,
there?
yeah.
So like you know, it'll be, I guess, less harsh in the redevelopment.
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Well,
Yeah,
it also adds to the natural transition of
Right.
going to city center too, I think,
Right,
right?
yeah,
It
right.
would have a feel for that. And I know I've said this before, but I feel, how much do you think it would be helpful to get a study of like how many buildings are, like, it's really hard to like know each, to kind of break these down, right? Into, unless everybody's just driving there and reporting back or something, I guess. To just know, like, this feels like it would work well for this or that, because you know, like, have you guys thought about, is there any benefit to kind of doing a study on how many of these are available here and what they might look like, or no?
in terms of,
Like, just different size lots and buildings, like, well, B one between Washington and Custer has, most of the lots are like this, and that would fit you know, multifamily, or it would not fit this, or it would, we could expand that use because these lots are deeper here or not so deep there. I feel like if we kind of had a breakdown, a little bit of just a knowing of the spatial abilities of each of these kind of places, then it would help us a lot.
yeah, there are character zones in the corridor.
Mhm.
So that this area that you're looking at in the photo here has functioning alleys behind these buildings. There's a strip of parking that's actually zoned parking behind them. There's some legacy uses in there that couldn't be established today. There's a little bit of outdoor storage. There's also a couple of kind of weird vacant lots that are owned, you know, by nearby businesses, but not really used for much. So there's some potential if, you know, the right agreement could be worked out that those could provide some sort of district parking for this area if you were to, maybe diversify the uses that are available there.
If we put the apartment building that was just in front of us at that location, they'd have plenty of parking. No.
Yeah, and then as well too, is you can even think about a property that maybe wants to provide shared parking, so. It's one big block that maybe like a new development that has a large parking lot. And a few uses right around it can kind of. Work out agreements with that owner and buy into.
They did that with the
Shared
funeral
parking
home,
lot.
didn't they? Not too long ago.
The funeral home and the bank, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when they did that.
So
Oh.
this is, yeah, so that being said, this is the corridor that probably of the four, so I know that that's maybe not what you're looking for in terms of a comparison, but this is the corridor that. Can have essentially the largest redevelopments, based on size and depth of lots. These lots go back far
Do you
compared
guys know
to
about how far back? they
about
go?
170 to 190
170
feet
to 190.
on average. Some are a bit more, like the weird cases that Joe was talking about is on a few of the side streets. They're kind of almost side street lots that go
Yeah,
back.
right,
I don't know what side street that is, but
Side street lots that go back.
there's one block where in between two side streets, there's a really deep kind of deep depth of
Between
the lots.
Kinross and. Bio.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
where they're almost old side lots as part of the side streets. But I mean, that's definitely a candidate for redevelopment that maybe can provide shared parking to other uses as other uses develop and as maybe second and third stories potentially develop on this corridor, which is another thought on maybe getting some feedback from you on height in this corridor.
Yeah, height would be a good thing to talk about, right? Especially.
Right.
Since it all does back up to residential.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any talks about future parking in terms of the city and the city study on what future parking might look like in putting a certain area there that might be, do we do that? Do we zone in the future if we're talking 50 years, this spot's gonna be needed for like downtown parking if we're expanding. Do we do something like that there, or that just comes when we need it?
There won't be any cars 50 years from now.
Oh, that's right.
Did you hear that?
Potentially,
Everyone just zip cars.
It could be a zip card hub or
Okay,
a
sorry, yeah.
Uber hub or a transit hub even.
Oh my God.
Bicycles.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of making B1 like that particular corridor, like less restrictive for new development. I just want to do it in like a way that it's cohesive as the rest of the corridor develops.
right.
And with minimal impact on residential, I have to say,
Yeah.
we're just,
Right.
that's all neighbors, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Would you, yeah, which is kind of the height
The height
comment.
thing.
I mean, do you have
know,
a height preference in terms of second or third stories or
Right.
where?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is if you're pulling everything closer to 14 Mile, you're pulling it further from the
Mhm.
neighborhoods.
Yeah,
So
Right,
it's a
The,
one.
the apartments are already 2-story there. regardless,
Yeah.
you know.
they are,
You can be,
Yeah.
in the RM1, you can actually have a third story. The business districts all are limited to 2. I think the office, you can go to 3.
office goes to 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I mean, really, those lots, if they're deep enough, right, then it's not gonna be that big of an issue. That's why I kind of
Right.
feel like it's hard to give an over, like a paint everything with one brush kind of thing.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing you can do from a form perspective is like, let's say we're entertaining the thought of 3 stories throughout this corridor. You can have a 3-story limit and like, if we're at a 0 to 5 foot setback, let's say off of 14 Mile, that keeps it on the opposite side of the lot from the residential, but where you have a shallower lot, perhaps the 3rd story has a further setback from the residential property line.
Mhm.
So that if you are on one of the shallower lots, you might not get the 3-story building because the setback of the 3rd story makes it impractical to do a 3-story building there or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
There's
okay.
all kinds of form considerations that you
Yeah.
can do that help alleviate that concern, I guess.
Okay,
What is the development that we just approved, between Custer and the three next to the church?
Mhm.
What is the front yard setback there from the sidewalk? Is that like
Oh,
current standards or?
25 or 30?
Yeah, I
feet?
think it was 25 or
Yeah.
30, if I
Um,
recall correctly.
Which is another thing that,
So that's a brand new development that's gonna
Yeah.
play into the obsolescence factor, right?
right, yeah, and because right now our RM district requires a much bigger setback than anything else that we
Yeah.
have.
But again,
Um,
that's east of, what I say, Bywood.
mhm.
Right,
You
Yeah.
could differentiate the two.
30, oh, it's 30 feet, thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it. As it's right now, it's RM, right? RM zone, so.
Yeah, there's some RM.
It's
zone
RM
there.
zone, which is still kind of a larger, traditionally. Deeper front setback requirement that
Yeah.
that
RM,
plan worked under.
RM1 sort of pictures a building right in the middle of a lot,
That's B1.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah,
with
you're
parking
not-
all
you're-
around it, basically.
Yeah.
That's B1.
I
RM2 would
think
be,
it's R2 though. Or the new one you're talking about that we just approved? is
RM1,
it's
so
not- yeah,
our
so this is a-
RM2 is the senior tower.
RM1,
okay, so-
RM1,
yeah,
okay.
it's right here. Right here, 'cause it's Custer and 2-3 lots in. So it's still B1.
No, it's RM1 right here. Which map? You might have an old.
This is online.
So Joe, while they're talking on the side, the intended output of this master plan discussion is, because I've read your notes, your recommendations, there's some recommendations. What do we do next?
Yeah, right, so we're talking about kind of what our ultimate vision for this corridor would be long term, and then it's kind of on us to then synthesize that into some suggestions that we can put in front of you that you can then kind of up or down on. I think probably just given the time tonight, we'll probably stick just to this corridor, and we can maybe defer the others to January 9th, given that it's almost 10 o'clock. So we can kind of advance through this West 14 mile discussion and then address the other ones later. But and there's probably not as much to talk about on the other ones, but
This is definitely the busiest one, just
Yeah.
in the terms of our preliminary
well,
look
and
at it and analysis.
it has the highest average annual daily traffic counts.
Yeah.
It's definitely the busy one.
So Joe, in terms of when you think aesthetically as a city planner, and you're coming into a city, you see buildings get taller, buildings get like, how do you see the feel of going from, I guess it's not even gonna be a residential use, but like the feel of coming into a city
Sure.
and how that might look and feel, I guess.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
mean,
see?
typically, as you come into a city center, things get a little closer to the street and they get a little taller. I
Mhm.
mean, that's generally the feel that you'd expect. The other thing is that, we have a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit on 14 Mile here, and I see a lot of people not going 35 miles an hour because it's 4 lanes, they're wide, there's a turning lane in the middle, and there's nothing, like, you don't have that sense of enclosure because it's all short buildings. And people just kind of feel like they can rip through there. As things get a little taller and closer to the street, that you kind of feel like you're somewhere,
Yeah,
and
but-
it does actually have an effect psychologically on drivers.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm saying like, do you feel like that should be all one conformity right there, the place we're talking about? Or do you feel like we should transition within that corridor itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to a degree you can transition within the corridor. you can maybe identify kind of your character pockets within the corridor and say that we're gonna treat each one a little bit differently and let the form evolve toward downtown.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like what Commissioner Carpenter was kind of thinking, right?
Right, exactly. I think he's been talking about that. Just based on the existing character, how you might wanna use that to address the future.
But so my question, I guess maybe I'm not asking right. Would the usage change? What do you see at the beginning versus the middle versus the end? Like, would you see a multifamily throughout, or would you see, oh, on the outskirts pocket, that's where you see like your little Whole Foods, and then as you get closer, there's not so many kind of, where we go into like a maybe condos versus like a denser, efficiency style living. Is that what?
Yeah, I mean,
Those are good questions.
Style,
Right.
like you're talking about function,
Mhm.
yeah, so what is the function is what you're saying, how's it?
Right,
how's
and
it
is there a transition there, or are we just looking
Can
for
be,
like, hey, come as you are, we'll
Right.
take you in?
I think it depends on the level of flexibility you're looking for. If you want to really open things up, you would kind of have a single use regime throughout the corridor. But if you did want to have some sort of ramp up to the downtown, you would probably try to concentrate your residential uses closer to the downtown so that they're providing more of that support for downtown.
Or a mixed use too, right?
Right,
Is
yeah,
that-
exactly. And those
okay.
could be included in a mixed use project.
Right, okay,
And then perhaps the more outer towards Westgate you go, maybe you have a little bit more of the automobile almost
oh, you're
oriented.
just saying what's already there, because we got a Pet Boys,
Yeah, I mean,
Well, that's what the Westgate is.
Yeah.
essentially, yeah.
but uses that more handle kind of the quick in and out, like vehicle shopper or
Access,
patron,
yeah.
rather than,
Well-
you know, a resident who's living in one of the buildings trying to walk and access their daily needs or their entertainment.
So eventually it spreads out more with the parking and the things like that,
Right.
okay.
Yeah,
And the B1 is called the neighborhood business district. It'd be nice if there were some neighborhood businesses, that actually like someone who lives in one of the houses up the side street could actually walk down and like access some convenient services that people frequently need to access.
I do the Jets Pizza.
Yes, sure. Yeah, exactly. I walk down to Cottage Inn at the end of my street all the
Yeah.
time, or 7-Eleven or whatever,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that kind of business that actually does have that, like when your kid turns 12, now they get to walk to the fill in the blank on their own now, and it's like a rite of passage kind of thing, It would be nice to have some of those businesses come into this corridor.
For sure.
And the more, if you do have some of that residential coming in, you have more to support that kind of thing. Any other thoughts or reactions on this corridor? Because I think what we could do is, obviously, we have pending discussion on the others, but we could start working on some concepts to present to you for this corridor, so that you have something to look at and respond to. And then we can have the discussion on the other ones at the next meeting and then develop that for those as well.
I guess photos are always nice.
Yeah, well,
I
yeah.
like when you
I
guys bring
think
in like,
Yeah.
here's the different styles, right, of like what it could look like kind of thing. We have room for a skating rink here in Claflin anywhere? Do we even zone for that?
We have
that.
we have a former one. It's
Well,
on a
but
name now.
I didn't grow up here, man.
Every Friday night.
Well, wasn't it fun?
Oh, yeah.
He's blushing now because we need to bring the ambassador back.
Just speaking about what we're missing or like other feedback from the residents, when we're getting the surveys results, I thought you
Oh.
guys were talking about having that.
Yeah, it's we've got it all. We're just trying to put it in a just.
I was just thinking that it may help us think about different zonings in these
Right.
regions, right? In terms of like if respondents had said something about certain areas and where they leave Clawson to go somewhere else. another
Right.
city because they don't have the availability here, so that could be helpful.
Yeah, we do have all that. Right now it's 49 pages of results, so we're trying to kind of boil it down.
I got you.
Make it a little more digestible, because it is a lot of information, like it's kind of overwhelming. So yeah, we are working on trying to boil it down and making it a little more presentable and digestible. But yes, that was one of the questions we asked, so that is something that we can. pull
Just
into our discussion.
Some data point that we can look at.
Yeah.
So does that mean January-ish then, or?
Yeah, and I think that we can do two things. One is that we can give you kind of the boiled down version of it, but we can also give you access to the full deal, and then you can explore it to your heart's content. But you don't have to necessarily hack your way through whatever number of pages it is of all the.
You know, I'm happy to,
intricate
that's my
detail.
job, so.
Oh, yes.
I'll take a look for you, and see if I can pull anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So I guess my one question too, as we kind of revisit this next meeting for the other corridors, would you like to kind of preemptively see some more photographs and more visuals on these other corridors, or do you just want us to then bring back visuals on what we've discussed here tonight on this corridor?
I think it'd be helpful to have visuals of like even now too, like I like
Okay.
how you have this, but
Yeah.
in how you did the Google map thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I didn't see this in our packet, but it's helpful for us, I think, at least for me, to be able to see like what's there now and really even help us envision, because we might not have time to like actually
Okay.
drive each corridor each time. And reference it during discussion. I don't know if anybody else, but yes, I think pictures are always helpful before and proposed maybe after or ideas.
All right, yeah, we can maybe bring a little more of that conceptual presentation into the next discussion right up front.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Shall we move on to other business? Anything under other business? How about a planner's report?
That was kind of it. So,
Okay.
happy holidays, everybody.
Staff report and training opportunities, pretty much in our packet.
I don't have much to verbally report unless anyone has any questions on anything. I'd be happy to answer them. And then I do just want to remind everyone that the next would-be scheduled meeting is December 26th, the day after Christmas. So I think just kind of planning ahead, we'll probably have to just boot that meeting and then meet next on January 9th. I think that's common practice, what we've done historically. Does anybody have any objections to that?
I have none. Nobody else is.
Okay. And then I know that there's been some talk on maybe not being up to speed is where we want to be in the master plan process. So maybe that January 9th meeting, that's usually the organizational meeting for the year, can talk about finding time to do a special meeting or a workshop again, where we can kind of talk about some of this stuff more in depth and maybe get some more visuals or, some more interactive stuff on the screen, or maybe have the meeting in the back community room. And that way there's some chance for some more interactive opportunity.
Okay, in the packet under the ordinance updates. The ordinance is the wall height requirements. It said the amendment with proposal was approved on September 12th. Secondary review of an ordinance amendment regarding walls being reviewed by Giffords and Webster. Does that mean that ordinance is in limbo someplace, or?
So I think it's something that is still being worked on right now. It's just with doing the master plan and other site plans that have been in front of you, it hasn't been presented.
Is that where we raised the wall height to 6 foot?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now, somebody could put up a 4.5 foot fence and it would be okay.
Well, if they did, they'd have to come to you and then you'd ultimately say no.
We're telling them no. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Rooftop screening, that was brought up in today's thing, that comes up to us before. I don't know if anybody else here, if you take the time, I almost sent a note out to somebody, drive over by Biscuits and Gravy and take a look at the rooftop screening. Now, it's on their list of things to do that we gave a site plan approval. I complained because it looked like bicycle racks on the roof that they had. Now it looks like some thrown out aluminum siding that they've zip tied to it. It looks atrocious. It looks terrible. I can't believe, is our building department not commenting to them? I wouldn't put that on my house. I mean, the rooftop units look better without the aluminum siding. If you take a chance, you can't see it at night. Let's take a chance and look at it in the daytime. It's aluminum siding that looks like it came from a salvage yard.
Is there a criteria for rooftop screening and specifically like what materials and what it should?
It was on their site plan. It's mandatory that they do it, but I don't know
Right.
if there were any prints shown to us as to what they were gonna do.
Right, we don't have a criteria or an ordinance calling any type of material or aesthetics to it.
Do we want to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock?
Sorry, is it past 10?
I think it's.
No, I mean, there's not a specific, like,
So we
It
can't
has to
really
be
hold
made
them
up
to
for
anything,
this.
right?
not really, it's,
So we extend the meeting for 10 minutes, that we all,
Oh.
can we do that?
Uh.
Okay, good, we'll take another 10.
but, I haven't noticed it driving by, but I'll take a look at it when I leave here and,
Are there certain standards that we can look to or like point them to for that?
well, I mean, I guess there's a couple things I would say to that. One is that, if the screening looks worse than the unit,
It does.
that's probably not meeting the spirit and intent of the ordinance. So we would probably have a conversation with the property owner about that. The other is that, if the screening is not effective at screening the unit that it's supposed to be screening, we
We
obviously.
did this years ago to a
Yeah.
laundromat where they put up vinyl screening over it, zip tied it on, the wind did it, knocked it off. And he came in and said, well, we're gonna put the vinyl back up again. We said, no, you're not. And we had him come in with actual drawings, and now it's covered with proper
Mhm.
metal thing, and this was,
Sure.
we had drawings to see what it was gonna do.
Right, because there's a lot of different screening systems for rooftop units, and they're made of everything from aluminum to Trex to wood to, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do that'll look just fine. But like I said, I haven't looked at this one. I haven't noticed it, but we can take a look at it and see
It's just
what's up.
problematic from my standpoint of view is that when we approve a site plan, rooftop screening was on that site plan and it's not being accomplished or enforced as far as I can tell.
Right, so real quick, they do have an open site plan right now to increase their parking, so we can make sure that's addressed before that's closed out.
Okay, tack it under that,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
The other thing is, we went through signage for quite a while up here. We don't like cardboard signs stuck all over town. It makes it look like a garage sale. And I think we passed an ordinance on that, you know, those are not supposed to be around. And when you come to what the things, I don't know, I call them sandwich boards, the things that are folded like a triangle and you stick them up. I think the ordinance on that is you're allowed to put one up during business hours. At the end of business hours, you got to remove it, take it inside. I've seen 3 or 4 places around town where they've actually got them tied on to telephone poles and onto light poles, and they haven't been moved.
So that is something I'm working with code enforcement on right now to address throughout downtown. I know we had a little bit of a brief issue with feather banners as well. And so there's no, as far as I know, there's no feather banners up. And so we're working on addressing the signage. And part of the problem is, you know, we have these ordinances in place. A business goes and puts a sandwich board out, leaves it out. Someone else thinks they can do it. And so we're working on getting all that into compliance. The only area in downtown that can have sandwich boards outside. And so, you know, working with businesses outside of downtown, how they can market their business better is something we're doing. So we're actively notifying businesses that they can't do it and working on, you know, solutions on how they can, you know, continue drawing customers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And here we go again on temporary CFOs, temporary certificate of occupancy. It's 288 14 Mile. It's still under status with administration. I had this conversation with our city attorney about this, and apparently he's taking it to court. I don't know why, because I think it could have come here and we could have settled it, and I was told that I won't get any kind of response till after January. So it's been 2 years now, and maybe we're getting somewhere now, maybe. We'll see how it goes. That's all I have. We have no legal update because there's no lawyer here. Does anybody else have any comments, closing comments?
I just had one closing comment. The sustainability committee is meeting one last time before the end of the year, I think on the 20th. So that's a Wednesday at 6 PM, in case anybody wanted to join or anybody listening wants to attend virtually. So I think it's all on the website. I think we updated it, right, Jack?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Comments, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion support, roll call please.
Mr. Solomon,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin, Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Kucera,
Yes,
Mr. Nushai, Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
You get to do the meeting, but they're.
Yeah, no, I technically didn't.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like, right, we were still standing up there and I saw the notice.
It was like